Christopher, we have one further interpreter who will be joining around 1. Will you be able to set up the interpretation, or are you going to hand things back over to me at that time?
I don't know how to do the setup, so that will be handed back to you at that time.
Okay, perfect. I'll keep an eye out for that then.
And you'll remember to revert host capability to me when you're done, right?
Yeah, I'm just going to do a quick test on both my channels before handing things over, but you'll have it back in like 10 seconds.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Booth 1 English. Booth 2 English. Morning, Gila. Could you do a 5 count on English and then French for me quick? You're muted. No? On English? Oh, you're on French. Yeah, I'll switch over. There you are. Yep.
English channel, English channel. English channel, English channel, English channel.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Audio test 1, 2.
All right, I think we have sorted out the technical challenges and we're going to get started. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue. As we begin our meeting today and on behalf of Ottawa City Council, I wish to acknowledge that Ottawa is built on unceded Anishinaabe-Algonquin territory. The peoples of the Anishinaabe-Algonquin Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continued to nurture this land. The City of Ottawa honors the people and land of the Anishinaabe-Algonquin Nation and honors all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. I'll now ask the committee coordinator to do a roll call, please.
Councillor Luloff.
Present.
Councillor Dudas.
Present.
Councillor Curry.
Here.
Councillor Gower.
Here.
Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Councillor King.
Here.
Councillor Lieber.
Here.
Councillor Brockington.
Here.
Councillor Menard.
Here.
Councillor Giroux. Vice Chair Kitts.
Here.
Mayor Sutcliffe.
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? Okay, confirmation of minutes from the meeting of July 2nd. Are the minutes confirmed? We'll note the response to inquiries. And we do have a procedural motion on a couple of items. Vice Chair Kitts, if you wouldn't mind reading that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Whereas the following report was not distributed with the Finance and Corporate Services Committee agenda, but was posted on September 11th, 2024. 5.1 proposed 2025 budget directions, timeline, and consultation process. Therefore, be it resolved that pursuant to subsection 89.3 of the procedure bylaw, the Finance and Corporate Services Committee approved the addition of this report, and be it further resolved that the Finance and Corporate Services Committee requests Council suspend the rules of procedure to consider the following reports at its meeting of September 18th, 2024. 5.1 proposed 2025 budget directions, timeline, and consultation process. 7.1 application for approval to expropriate lands baseline transit priority phase project, and therefore be it resolved that Finance and Corporate Services Committee suspends section 83.4A of the rules of procedure to receive the presentation on item 5.4 entitled Presentation Information Technology Services Update Q3.
Thank you, Vice Chair Kitts. Is that carried? All right, on item 5.1, proposed 2025 budget directions, timeline, and consultation process, and 5.2, the 2024 tax and rate operating capital budget Q2 status. We have a presentation on both those items, so I'll turn it over to Cyril and Suzanne.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just give it a sec for the presentation to load up. All right, so good morning, Mr. Mayor and members of the committee. So today what you have before you is a combined presentation on the Q2 rate and tax supported services results to date and our forecast to the end of the year for 2024. And immediately following that, we'll do a little presentation in terms of the budget directions which you have before you today for approval. Before I pass it over to Suzanne, I do want to touch on a couple of things, and I'll speak to this more in the directions component of the presentation. We started the 2025 budget well in advance of 2025. I mean, we really started looking at the budget immediately following the adoption of the 2024 budget. In January, February, March, we did a lot of extensive work. And a couple of key points that you'll see in the Q2 report and our forecast, we are forecasting a small surplus for 2024. And the relevance there is, as we were proceeding through the first quarter of the year and looking at our challenges coming up for the 2025 budget, The organization did implement a discretionary spending freeze and a hiring pause where there was no direct impact to staffing at the operational level. So those were two key things that we've done. We've done that in the past, and these are key things that's helping us mitigate our costs and our financial prudence in year for the 2024 budget. So again, knowing the challenge, we took a very prudent approach early in the year to make sure that we could, forecast a surplus for this year. Next slide, please. I'll now pass over to Suzanne to walk you through the next couple of slides.
Good morning. Beginning with the second quarter results of 2024, the report follows the regular annual budget status updates. As seen at the top of the slide, we began the year reporting on the prior year results, then our first quarter, capital closures, bringing us here to today. The
report is presenting the results of our operating results coming from taxes.
In addition to the results, an overview of the issues or risks being monitored during the year are provided. These results are not inclusive of Ottawa Police Services, Ottawa Public Health, Ottawa Public Library, and Transit Services, as they are presented to the respective boards and commission. Next slide, please. The
results for the tax-supported programs have been updated until the end of the year.
The second quarter, tax-supported programs saw a $7.8 million surplus against budget. This is driven by staffing vacancy savings across the organization and from higher interest earnings on investment income. Recreation, Cultural and Facility Services, Public Works, and Planning, Development, and Building Services are reporting deficits at the end of the second quarter due to increased program facility maintenance in RCFS, lower automatic speed enforcement revenues in Public Works, and lower planning applications and building permit revenues in planning. Une prévision excédent de 3,6 millions de dollars attribuable
3.6 million deficit is due to lower revenues because of the tax increase and billing of water services. Next slide.
Rate-supported programs reported an overall $2.6 million surplus and are forecasting a $2.2 million surplus. This is namely due to vacancies and higher drinking water and stormwater revenues. Les programmes financés par les redevances présentent un excédent de 2,6 millions de dollars et presque la même prévision à la fin d'année.
It's almost the same forecast at the end of the year due to vacancies and higher drinking water and stormwater revenues.
I will now pass it back to Cyril to present the 2025 budget directions.
Thank you, Suzanne. Next slide, please. And right into the next slide. So again, the 2025 budget is kind of, we label it as a journey because it really has been somewhat of a journey to date. We've been starting this process, as I mentioned earlier, immediately following the adoption of the 2024 budget. A lot of things we continue to work and leverage from the service review framework that I'll speak to in a little bit later in terms of the $153.5 million worth of savings that we achieved in the last two budgets of this term of council. Also, immediately following the adoption of the 2024 budget, the Transit Long Range Financial Plan Working Group was struck with Councillor Tierney, Gower, Councillor Leeper, and the Mayor, along with finance staff, transit staff, and transportation services staff as well. That team started meeting immediately in January. We kicked off early in January, and we've been meeting every 2 to 4 weeks, thereabouts, a little bit of a pause during the summer months, but we continue to do a lot of work. In March, early April, we came before committee and council with the Ontario-Ottawa deal that was struck throughout the first quarter of 2024. Last week, 2 weeks ago now, we provided an in-depth presentation on the financial challenges facing the city. And is the mic still on? Oh, facing the city and the challenges that presents for the 2025 budget. All at the same time, in addition to that, we brought forward a number of asset management plans in the first half of the year. We brought forward our first solid waste master plan and our first solid waste long range financial plan. So again, continuing that diligence and financial reports to help guide us. And as per normal practice in every year, we do monthly reviews. Finance staff, departments do monthly reviews with their monthly results. We go do a line by line review in terms of identifying any potential risks that may be in year and any potential risks that we may need to address in the subsequent budgets coming up. Next slide, please. So as per the council approved 2023-2026 governance review, council approved a term of council budget process. Part of this process was directing the chief finance officer and the treasurer to bring forward a report that details the budget timetable and provides the budget directions in advance of the yearly budget process. The purpose of the budget directions report is to get committee and council endorsement of the strategies used to develop and table the budget that will be reviewed and for final adoption later in December. The council approved direction is a predefined tax increase as a standard practice in municipal budgeting. It provides strong financial discipline and financial management in which council has played a leading role in the city's overall approach to financial prudence and sustainability. It also aligns to council's emphasis on the importance of continuous improvement and the term of council service review framework that's endorsed. Strong financial management continues to be a priority for the city, council, and our residents, and it's one of the foundational pieces of our overall budget process. Next slide, please. So on this slide, oh, there we go. On this slide, so basically, as I reiterated before, and you've heard me speak to before, the budget is guided by a number of key financial plans and financial reports. We have a variety of long-range financial plans that I've spoken to earlier, our fiscal framework, our reserve management policy, our term of council strategic priorities, and of course, the service review framework. These main reports help us, again, continue with our financial prudence, sustainability, and overall financial management. And in addition to this, as I spoke earlier, we do a very vigorous and onerous process when it comes to the budget build process. As I talked about starting the budget early in the year, there's been continuous briefings at the SLT. There's been continuous work with the DLT, so that's the extended leadership of the SLT, and continuous challenges and functions of the budget pressures as we build into the final stages of the budget process. We've been going into what I would label as a little bit of a deeper dive since June. There's been a variety of reviews at the departmental level and the extended departmental level that will continue between now and the final tabling that's coming up in November. Next slide, please. On this slide, I think the French slide is a little too advanced. There you go. Thank you. So this slide here is a depiction of the service review framework, and I'll deem it as a success to date. In the last two budgets, we've achieved $153.5 million worth of savings that I've spoken to several times. That equates to approximately a 7.5% tax levy. Had that not been achieved, that would have been the requirement. So at the top, as you can see, when we start the process, the requirement is set at, in 2023 at a 7.4% levy, and 2024 just over 9%. Through the achievements and the success of the savings that we were able to generate through the service review framework and through the continuous improvement in things that we've been able to bring forward in those successive budgets, that's how we've been able to reduce the net requirement from the tax levy. So again, as a reminder, the tax levy is the main source. It's about 48 to 52% of the revenue that we generate in terms of funding the services. And that's how we've been able to achieve those tax rates with that significant success of the service review framework and savings. Next slide, please. So what you have before you today is the endorsement of the 2025 budget directions. So from the municipal property tax levy, no more than 2.9%. This is what we deem as citywide services in addition to Ottawa Public Health, Ottawa Public Library, and Ottawa Police Services. The assessment growth for 2025 as set by MPAC right now is forecasted at 1.5%. It's also recommended that each of the above boards and commissions be allocated their pro rata share of the 1.5%. The user fee increases are developed in accordance with our fiscal framework and respective long-range financial plans. Solid waste budget, if you recall, in June, we brought forward as I mentioned earlier, the first solid waste long-range financial plan. At that time, we presented a model that required a 17% increase, but there was a commitment at the time to take that away and work with the solid waste team to make sure that we can reprofile the capital requirements. It is a capital intensive program and service. So what we've been able to do is reduce that to a 7% increase for 2025. Again, that plan is a 28-year plan. So we've been able to rescope, recalibrate the capital requirements to adjust that to a 7% increase for 2025. The rate supported program be developed in accordance with the adopted long-range financial plan for rate. And of course, we'll be bringing forward the updated service review efficiencies and continuous improvements as part of the detailed documents that you'll see during tabling. Next slide, please. For transit, as you recall, it's a separate set of recommendations as we presented on September 4th in terms of the main financial challenges facing the city. So we have a direction to capture the required funding from Ottawa's fair share. That's that between 0 and 120 million. Transit levy be increased by no less than 2.9% to a maximum of 37%. Transit fares at the 2.5% up to 75%. So all the levers that we talked about in the September 4th presentation to the council. In addition, below what you'll see is the continued work that the long-range financial plan, the transit long-range financial plan working group will continue to do, continue to meet and in terms of tabling that document on November 13th. Next slide, please. As we move into the next process of the budget, 2025 budget process, we move into the consultation process. So again, councillors have started to set up individual consultations or shared consultations in their wards. City staff will be there to help support that and present some documents on the overall budget process. The councillor meetings with the city manager, the mayor, and myself started last week and are near completion. We do have resident engagement in terms of survey and feedback. And as always, residents can provide input and feedback on the budget throughout the year. From an enhancements perspective, if you recall back in 2023, staff made the commitment to continue to enhance the budget documents, improve literacy, provide more key performance indicators, break down additional data. So last year, we introduced the new budget online tool. We're reframing that this year to be a more interactive and more exploratory type budget tools, now being labeled as a budget explorer. We've enhanced and increased some of the features, making it much more easy to navigate and understand. We're integrating more KPIs into the budget document and the budget process, and we'll continue with that. We've also, in the 2024 budget, we did include several additional multi-year forecast views of different service areas, and we're going to build on that. And again, our commitment to continue to improve the overall literacy of the budget process here at the city. Next slide, please. So what you have before you today, from a timeline perspective, once this is adopted or recommended for council on Wednesday, adopted, we move into the consultation process, public engagement process. The budget will be tabled on November 13th. And then finally, the committee meetings will occur throughout November into early December, with final adoption coming before council on December 11th. Mr. Mayor, that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We will get to questions in a moment, but we do have some public delegations. So we'll begin those, starting with Robin Brown. Whenever you're ready, sir. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, it's good to be back. And as always, it's good to be Black. Unless, of course, you're a Somali Ottawa Police Service officer. Which brings me to why I'm here, which is to address the budget direction for you to approve an increase to the police levy of up to 2.9% that would lead to another multi-million-dollar increase to the police budget. I'm here to ask you to follow your own council priorities and reject such an increase. And that's because your four priorities that you set are: 1, a city that has affordable housing and is more livable for all; 2, a city that is more connected and reliable, safe, with reliable, safe, and accessible mobility options; 3, a city that is green and resilient; and 4, a city with a diversified and prosperous economy. Policing, as you just heard, isn't one of your priorities yet. Most of you are going to approve another multi-million-dollar budget increase despite the Ottawa Police Service continuing to violate the human rights of Ottawa citizens, including its own Somali officers. And I say thanks to the people who are not going to vote against it, all three of you. Most of you are going to support another large police budget increase despite the overwhelming evidence that police reforms don't work. And here is just some of that evidence. On June 25th last year, the Ottawa Police received 911 calls at 2:11 p.m. about a man with a knife in the Byward Market having a mental health crisis, and responded by shooting and killing the man 2 minutes later at 2:13 p.m. In December 2023, the story broke about an Ottawa police officer who was convicted of threatening to kill his ex-girlfriend wielding a knife in a 2020 domestic dispute, being demoted for 2 years but not fired. Groups who work to support victims of violence against women were quoted saying they were disappointed but not surprised. In February of this year, the Ottawa police tased, struck, and kicked Kane Nyandagara because they thought he was another Black guy they were looking for. Chief Stubbs admitted the police acted on a tip from someone who said Mr. Nyandagara was the guy they were looking for. But video showed the police continued to beat Mr. Nyandagara on the ground, even though he wasn't resisting, and media reports said the police kept him handcuffed for 20 minutes after they knew who he was. In June, the Ottawa Police released the results of its 10-year traffic stop race collection data showing that not only have things not gotten better, they've gotten worse. Between 2013 and 2015, Black people made up 8.8% of OPS traffic stops, but by 2023, 10 years later, that number had risen to 18.3%. So all the reforms haven't worked. Anti-racism training hasn't worked. Hiring more diverse officers hasn't worked. Expanding and rebranding community policing hasn't worked. In July, the OPS released its latest use of force data showing OPS officers continued to use force disproportionately on Black and Middle Eastern residents, just like they've been doing for the last 4 years. The Ottawa Carleton District School Board ended the School Resource Officer Program in 2021 after it did a human rights-based evaluation that found the program was harmful to Black, Indigenous, and LGBTQ plus students, among others. Despite that, both Chief Stubbs and Deputy Chief Burnett have said they want to, quote, increase police presence at schools. And the chief said he met with directors of education in early June to discuss exactly that. Why? Do the police have new data showing that police in schools don't violate the human rights of students? No, they don't. But they do have data from their 2024 first quarter performance report that shows that OPS officers continue to spend less than 1% of their time responding to priority 1 calls that involve, quote, actual or imminent danger of bodily injury or death, often with a known presence of weapons, unquote. That means OPS officers spend 99% of their time doing things like directing traffic and taking people with mental health crises to the hospital, that is, if they don't shoot them. So most of the millions of dollars are going to go towards paying officers to do mostly that stuff, not the priority 1 stuff that the OPS would have us think. So I'm asking you to follow your own priorities and stop investing in police reforms that aren't working. Instead, invest in things that support your 4 priorities: affordable housing, reliable, safe, and accessible transit, climate action, and building a diversified and prosperous economy. Do that and be part of reimagining community safety by shifting money away from the Ottawa Police to things that actually respect people's human rights and keep us all safer. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any questions, so thank you, sir. Next delegation is from Alex Cullen. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, members of council. My name is Alex Cullen. I'm here on my own behalf, and I have 3 items to bring to your attention. The first is really a budget process issue. If you look on page 21 of your report, you'll see at the bottom of the page a line that says members may move a motion at a standing committee to increase that committee's budget envelope by identifying an offsetting reduction from a different standing committee budget, et cetera, et cetera. So this was a measure that was brought in by Mayor Watson more than 10 years ago as a form of fiscal discipline. If you were going to suggest something new, you had to take something out. This emasculates, in my view, the role of councillors, and it's not how we built the city. We did not go into, for example, public health to find the money to establish paramedics. We did not take money away from transportation department to set up the adult crossing guard program. And we did not take money away from OC Transport bus service to establish the community bus pass for people on ODSP. So quite simply, yes, I believe councillors should be able to propose things. Obviously, there's a debate There is an issue of evaluating its value to citizens, but taxes pay for services. So I think this amalgamation is not very helpful for city building. The other point I wish to make today deals with your major item with respect to the transit deficit. The transit deficit, you're facing issues relating to raising fares, cutting service, raising the transit levy. 2 years ago, you were faced with the same issue. And 2 years ago, you were warned that if you cut service and raise fares, you would end up in a worse situation because you would have fewer riders and fewer passenger revenue. But you did it anyway. Last year, you were faced with the same dilemma: to raise fares, cut service, and you were warned again that if you raise fares and cut service, you would just lose riders, and that would impact your passenger revenue, and you'd be in a worse situation. You did it anyway. So the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So I would say to you that when you go through the budget process, I think you're going to be faced with raising the transit levy. Because if you raise fares, you lose riders. If you cut service, you lose riders. But if you raise the transit levy, you don't. The last thing I want to bring to your attention is something that transpired last week at a public information session on the future of Belltown Dome, which is an indoor hockey arena in Bay Ward. It is the only indoor hockey arena in Bay Ward, and unfortunately is coming to the end of its life. The staff came out to tell us that with a $3.2 million requirement to upgrade or to repair that facility, there wasn't a business case for it. Okay. But you should all know that a couple of things. Number one, 3 leagues already use that facility. Never mind the neighborhood, never mind Ottawa Community Housing up in Britannia Woods and Michelle Heights with their Learn to Skate program. But hockey leagues from Kanata, Nepean, West End Hockey Association, they're going to have to go elsewhere. That's for one league only, that's 500 extra hours that is going to be putting a pressure on the system. The other thing you should know is that the average age of your ice pads, 45 years. And yet you only have in your life cycle program for sports facilities some $22 million for 44 pads. Your asset management plan tells you you're short some $900 million over 10 years simply to keep these services in place, repair them when needed, and deal with growth. That's what you're short, 900 million. So it really shows how ridiculous a 2.9% tax cap is when you're not addressing the services that are in this city. There are 44 ice pads in this city. Most of them are single pads. So what's going to happen when, for example, Brewer Pool and Arena comes to their end of their life, or Tom Brown, or Fred Barrett, or Jack Sharon out in Kanata? You don't have the money to replace them, and your policy says 2-pad process. 2 pads. You want 2 pads. So 2.9% is not going to cut it. You're simply booting it down. This hole that you have, $900 million, is simply going to get large, and that is only in recreation and culture. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify something you said. You said 2 years ago we raised transit fares, but in fact 2 years ago we froze transit fares.
So since 2010, transit fares have been increased every year save one. And we went from a ridership level of 103.5 million rides to now 67 million rides. So every time you raise fares, you lose riders. It's there. And again, you have another option. And I think you won't lose riders if you use that other option, which is the transit levy.
Okay, thank you. Next presentation is from Andrew Lumsden. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Andrew Lumsden. I'm a retired chartered accountant who spent many years working for one of Canada's largest accounting and auditing firms in Toronto. As a hobby from my earliest childhood, I have always had a keen interest in trains around the world. Hence, I have followed the development of the LRT commencing about 10 years ago with interest. It saddens me to see what has happened. The LRT does not function properly and probably never will. Hyperbole, you might say. Look at the facts. A narrow gauge and sharp bends, at least in the first phase. This matters because it puts an enormous physical strain on the train's wheel assemblies. Trains do not have a differential, as cars and buses do, so the wear and tear as they go screeching through bends is enormous and expensive to repair. Beyond the malfunction of the LRT has been the bastardization of the transitway to accommodate it. Our transitway was the first rapid system of its kind in North America. Abroad, it was recognized as an Ottawa success. So why, oh why, would we ever have messed up something that actually worked and served the people of Ottawa? Andy Haydon, after whom this hall is named, must be turning in his grave. He's alive. That's good. I had one final paragraph, but it was extremely negative. So I woke up at 4 o'clock this morning and I said, how can I be positive? What can we do now? The accountant in me was concerned about the city eventually going into bankruptcy because of the LRT. So I now have two suggestions. One is for you, Mr. Mayor, to take a busman's holiday and spend 10 or 2 weeks in Europe, especially perhaps Scandinavia, and talk to your fellow counterparts there and ask them how they are handling traffic, transit, and transport. I think you will be amazed at the changes that they've been making recently, particularly with their attempts to lessen the number of motor cars going into the city. The other thing that you will find out is that apart from the transport, they have taken great steps to, and I think I'm repeating myself, to lessen traffic going into downtown. So that's what I think you'll learn. And if you step over to Helsinki, you will see that they have pretty well solved the homeless problem, but that's not on today's agenda. My other idea is, with regard to the LRT, can we not make it a surface system? Can we not, for example, do away with the tunnel, which has been a mess from day one, and make the whole system surface? Imagine an LRT going through Spark Street and bringing that alive, carrying all the way down into Rideau Street and on. And in that way, I think that you would help to keep lots of what we have, which is good, especially in the stretch over to the 10th line. That's pretty straight. and probably serviceable. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, I don't see any hands up, so we'll move to Marko Milusevich.
Hello, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead, sir. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you all for taking the time. My name is Marko Milusevich. I'm a lifelong resident of Ottawa, and I've spent most of my time living in the suburbs. And I'm someone who, for most of my life, had to rely on public transportation to get me to and from school and work. I've moved to a place where I thankfully no longer need to rely on transit to satisfy my daily needs, but many in my city don't have the same luxury. The current proposed budget is going to put every single one of those people, and even those who don't rely on transit, in a worse off situation. It will not do anything to tackle the huge projected shortfalls for the city of over $4 billion over the next decade, and it will set us up for failure as a city in that time. We're currently proposing an increase of 2.9% for property taxes, while other major Canadian cities are doing as much as 3 times that increase. For comparison, our compounded total tax increase since 2014 was about 30%. Toronto's was about 43, Edmonton's 48, Calgary 47, and Vancouver all the way up at 74%. If we kept pace with the average Canadian city for property tax increases over the last decade, we would have an extra $1.5 billion today. If we instead doubled this 2.9% property tax increase, it would cost your average Ottawa household a whopping $11.66 extra every month. We are talking about less than the cost of a coffee and a sandwich to make sure our city is on the right path again. Keep in mind that the city has currently an expected over $4 billion shortfall to maintain just the existing assets over the next decade. We are going to let our whole city fall apart just to save each household a coffee and a sandwich a month. This is after we just had Transit Commission have over 30 people delegate in response to the proposed cuts to the LRT that will amount to a grand total savings of $1.6 million a year. If that many people had a huge outcry over $1.6 million worth of cuts, imagine what you'll have on your hand when people realize what's going to happen with $4 billion worth of service cuts and infrastructure deterioration. No more outdoor pools, no more snow clearing, no more parks, no more tennis courts, no more transit, and even more potholes in our roads. To make up this $4 billion shortfall, we'll need to increase property taxes by at least 5.5% a year for the next decade. The more you push this off, the harder it's going to hit us, and we need to stop kicking the can down the road. I understand that there may be funding that we are due from other levels of government, and hopefully they do come forth and provide us with more help. But if we aren't even willing to help ourselves, why would we expect other levels of government to come in and save us? We also need to get over the idea that we're in this position through no fault of our own. We're absolutely a huge part of the problem. We have kept extremely low levels of property tax increases over the last couple decades, and our current dire situation is the direct result of those decisions. I also think using people who are most in need in the city as a bargaining tool to higher levels of government by proposing a 75% fare increase for transit is frankly disgusting. You're threatening to charge the poorest people in our city an extra $100 a month so that you can save homeowners $12. That's embarrassing. Separating out our transit levy as a separate item than the overall property tax increase is equally unconscionable, as you know exactly how that will land with most of the city's constituents who typically get around by car and rightfully hate our current transportation system. You are setting the transit up for failure deliberately, as has been done time and time again with the death spiral our transit is seeing. Are we going to separate out our road budget as well so that people can vote on increases to that separately? It only seems fair as that accounts for close to $500 million a year in costs to the city. We need to stop viewing transit as something that needs to make money itself. Do our roads make the city money? No, not directly, and neither should our transit be expected to. Transit is a public good that has tons of benefits downstream, such as unlocking job opportunities for citizens, helping people get out of poverty, unlocking housing opportunities, raising property values, leading to better mental health. It leads to less congestion for other drivers, and it makes your city worth visiting and so much more. These all lead to a healthier, happier, and more financially resilient city, as well as the people who live there. Transit needs to stop being viewed as something that those who have to take it use, and should be something that is part of our overall city's transportation options. If you truly wanted to save the citizens money, you would allow them to not be forced to own cars to have a dignified life in the city. Cars cost the average citizen over $15,000 a year, when including the cost of the car itself, insurance, maintenance, parking, fees, etc. That's over $1,200 a month, or in other words, a lot of coffees and sandwiches. In your draft budget, you say you're going to be building on the stability of the past while making sure that we're benefiting the community in the long term. What possible long-term benefit are we going to be doing when we admit that we don't have enough money to projected to keep our current infrastructure alive? No great city worth living in was created through austerity measures and service cuts. Do you not want to create a city that people are proud of? I urge you to please consider raising the property taxes to a much more appropriate level, but still very low level of 5.5%. This would cost your average citizen about the same amount as a Starbucks coffee a month and would do much for getting us out of this situation. I would like to leave you with a quote: a society grows great when old men plant trees in whose shade they know they shall never sit. Please plant those trees today, and don't wait until 10 years from now. It'll be too late. Thank you. That's my time.
Thank you very much. We'll move next to Juan Pedro Unger, which I believe is online as well.
Yes,
Yep,
hello.
go ahead. Good morning.
Good morning. Before I start, sorry, the timer is already running. Can you please pause? Thank you. I was going to say, I'm not going to be talking for or against the proposed increases. It goes without saying that they're bad and worse. I'm here actually to present you a solution to the financial mess, and so that you don't have to rely on higher taxes and more creative taxation. So anyway, without further ado, the time is running. Okay. Well, I know there's a growing urgency to cover the huge financial shortfalls that our city is facing, which I understand add up to billions for the coming years. We saw this coming already in February 2019 with the long-term financial plan presented at this committee and council as part of approving the LRT Stage 2. I pointed out then that the city was driving into a financial sinkhole, that it was a bad deal to begin with, and foolish to assume steady big revenues from the gas tax because of the evolution to hybrid and electric vehicles, and because a higher level of government could take away the transfers any moment. I was ignored, of course, and it happened exactly like that very soon after. I also alerted this committee and councillors repeatedly and to zero response about the huge debt increase and multi-million yearly cost resulting from the former mayor and associates in the debenture committee continuing to issue hundreds of millions in debentures to cover budget shortfalls. I wouldn't be surprised if the secretive issuing of huge debentures continues to this day. But now, I'm here to alert you to another thing, although you're probably aware of it already, and I know criticism without alternatives is not helpful, so I'm also presenting you a solution to the city's financial problems, a solution that would also help solve the housing crisis and other urban planning problems. First, the warning. I know I'm not alone in being sick and tired of the fast-growing efforts to gouge and bleed us dry with more and bigger taxes and fees and charges. Everything from garbage bag penalties to higher parking fees, and of course the disgusting negative billing vacant unit tax. And let's be frank, the growing number of speed cameras also. Speeding kills and must be stopped. But if a speed camera on King Edward gets 36,000 speeding tickets in a few months, despite the cameras, it's obvious you need speed bumps to stop speeding there immediately and not continue to rake in the millions that camera alone provides. So the cameras are clearly not entirely about safety. We are also increasingly sick and tired of seeing things like our transit service become a disservice and things like recreational facilities rust and crumble away. So what is the solution? Instead of taking more and more money from us, the city has to start making money. How? There is only one way in which the city can realistically start making actually billions of dollars without taking more from residents. Be a developer and start building a growing number of homes. Isn't that exactly what made Paul Desmarais, the Malhortas, and the Greenbergs all billionaires? The city is already a corporation. It already runs businesses in the public interest, OC Transport, Ottawa, Hydro, and more. It's just not doing it where it can be both very helpful and very profitable. And there's no reason why the city cannot do it. The city can become a sensible, affordable, competitive developer that builds the kind of homes people can afford, where they are needed, in designs that fit what the city needs. Affordable units, rental buildings, for sale houses and apartments. Instead of giving more and more millions to developers for alleged community improvements or to have them build and profit on a public park, do the building where it's needed, how it's needed. Private developers will oppose it, of course. It would force them to be more competitive, have better designs, and more reasonably priced homes. Instead of continuing to call surplus and sell off our city's public properties and land, start building on it. Start with one good piece of city-owned land. Open widely a competition for concept designs and construction, and maximize affordable housing, which means still profitable, just not prohibitively priced for many. Then do it again and again, more and more. Just don't put in charge the same people who run to the ground OC Transport. Don't hire friends or brothers-in-law or former chiefs of staff like was done with the LRT. Hire a set of competent professionals, a savvy urban planner or architect like Brent Doderian or Toon Reason, a team of recent business graduates. This can be done, this should be done, and soon. It will not solve the city's dismal situation immediately, but within a couple of years, it could start producing tens and then hundreds of millions in revenue, while contributing more and more to solve the housing crisis and creating spaces and communities that benefit the city. Please don't ignore this. It really is the only realistic and entirely feasible way the city can create revenue, and in a very helpful way, instead of taking more and more of our money through more and bigger taxes and charges and fees. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your presentation, sir. We'll go next to William Van Geest from Ecology Ottawa. Good morning.
Good morning. You're able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address you. I'm doing so on behalf of Ecology Ottawa, as the chair mentioned. So we've reviewed the budget directions for 2025, and we are perplexed. Since we're an ecology advocacy organization, my first search was for what the directions held on climate. The answer, nothing. Climate receives no mention. This despite the fact that we're in a climate emergency, which Council declared in 2019, as you know, and the effects of this crisis, which for Ottawans have included tornadoes, stifling wildfire smoke, flooding, a derecho, and more. In fact, there's no mention of the environment at all. And this despite the city's strategic priority number 3, that Ottawa be green and resilient. Of course, this isn't to say that there's nothing related to climate and the environment in the budget directions. It has quite a bit to say on transit, as you know, but it's grim. The directions identify a $120 million deficit in the transit budget, which strangely is separated from the rest of the budget. And the directions propose 7 different options, ranging from deferring capital investments to further service cuts to a whopping 75% fare increase. The picture painted here and in last week's Transit Commission meeting is of a transit system on life support, and we're preparing to start pulling plugs. Now, we're sympathetic to arguments that other levels of government should chip in. It's great to get their investments on capital costs, but we really need the help with operations. Understood. We're also sympathetic to arguments that municipalities bear an unfair burden of services to deliver relative to the taxes that we receive. But can we, in good faith, ask other levels of government for more funding given our recent track record? The budget directions contain much on value for taxpayers' money. But what credibility do we have when we made a $500 million deal with the Lansdowne owners, or when we approved a plan for costly sprawl with $600 million for water infrastructure alone, or when we've got over $1 billion in road widenings over the next 10 years, especially when we know that this will exacerbate an already bad traffic situation. But above all, how can we ask for more funding when we won't even raise property tax to meet inflation? And this, while our peer municipalities, for example, Toronto, Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, are raising their taxes from anywhere between 7 to 10%. It seems fundamentally backward to approach our budget by asking how much we're willing to raise property taxes and then deciding what we'll have to cut to make the numbers work. We should instead ask, what are the crises we're facing and what will it take to meet them? We must do our part to confront these crises, whether climate, biodiversity, housing affordability, addictions, and onward. I'll also remind this committee that a 1% property tax increase for the average assessment in Ottawa is less than $30 a month. To close, I want to return to the strategic priorities that Council set for itself at the beginning of this term of Council. I know they've come up already in delegations, but I'll review them again. A city that has affordable housing and is more livable for all. A city that is more connected with reliable, safe, and accessible mobility options. A city that is green and resilient, a city with a diversified and prosperous economy. Of these priorities, we already established that there's nothing in the budget directions explicitly addressing environment. The third one of these. On mobility, it's doom and gloom. But there's not even anything on housing in the budget directions. So far, 0 for 3. Will these budget directions improve the economy? The last priority? Given that the main thrust of the directions is capping property taxes, it's hard to see that they will. So these directions go backward on the climate emergency. They don't address the biodiversity crisis. They don't address housing. But more than that, they don't address the very strategic priorities that council set for itself. I can't see but that these directions must be rejected. I therefore urge you to reject them and to start again to address the real crises that Ottawans face today and will continue to face until we get serious about building a city for all Ottawans and the ecosystem that we inhabit. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Menard.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thanks, William, for your delegation and for pointing out some of the concerns that that you've got. I wanted to go back to 2023 when a motion was passed at council that asked for a more targeted approach so that we focused on term of council priorities. It also spoke to that in that motion, where an across-the-board approach where everyone just receives the exact same and you work with it didn't make much sense. And council passed that motion with the support of, it was unanimous, as I understand it. So I wonder what your thoughts would be on an approach that said, look, the library might need a bit more this year because they're making investments. OCH, because they have a small budget, well, they're not getting as much as, say, a larger budget would get with a 2.9%. Here's where council priorities stand on environment and on housing, and here's how we're going to address those through different percentages than, say, lower priority items that we've got. I wonder your view on a more targeted approach based on council's priorities, based on what you've said here today.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. That sounds like a great idea. You know, I think these are good priorities. Environment, housing, mobility, these are all things I think that we can agree on. The needs fluctuate per department, per cause, per year, and the budget absolutely should reflect that. You know, I think that sounds really on the right path. It really seems difficult to pull off what we're trying to pull off with such a low cap on property taxes. In addition, again, you know, looking at Toronto and what Mayor Chow was able to pull off in the last budget with I think it was 9 or 10% increase. They are increasing transit service at the moment. I was actually just there over the weekend. Their investments in their bike share system. Bike share are like half the bikes all over the city. And so we're seeing kind of the consequences of this more forward-thinking, more need-oriented budget approach in Toronto and the other peer institutions that I mentioned. So yeah, I definitely think that sort of a rethink of approach is in order, as I mentioned in my delegation.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you.
Councillor Gower.
Thanks for your presentation. Can you just clarify? So I want to make sure I understand your position. Are you saying that the mayor and council shouldn't be asking the other levels of government to provide additional funding, whether it's for transit or housing or anything else, given the unfairness and inequities that the mayor's outlined over the past 6 weeks or so?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I try to make this clear on my delegation, but I appreciate the opportunity to clarify further. Absolutely, we should. We should be making those requests to other levels of government, and that's, you know, a regular feature of our strategic plans, you know, by department. You know, my understanding is that the services that we are called on as a municipality to deliver are completely out of proportion with the tax that we receive. My point is that I think we need to restore some credibility on that front. I think, you know, if you take, you know, deals like the Lansdowne deal or the Taywin portion of the infrastructure master plan, or you know, the other shortfalls that we're seeing elsewhere, while keeping our own property tax rate cap so low, it seems difficult to make a case, I think. So absolutely, we need to ask for that money, but I think we also need to do our part of the equation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll open it up now to questions from members of the committee and councillors. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much. I'll keep my questions brief. This is a discussion that I have with staff every year. I don't agree with the approach of suggesting a arbitrarily low amount of tax increase until we know what the pressures are and until we know how much revenue we need to raise from residents in order to pay for the services that residents expect and deserve. Obviously, the budget is significantly along the process by the time we get to this point. If we are shooting for a 2.9% property tax increase, do you anticipate being able to hire a significantly larger number of bylaw officers? Context for my question, I continue to get the complaints week after week from residents about off-leash dogs in parks. There are parks to which residents are afraid to go because they know that there are going to be off-leash dogs. And today I'm watching people bring their dogs onto play structures, knowing there are no consequences because there is no proactive enforcement. We need a significantly larger number of bylaw officers across the city enforcing those rules proactively in order to try to rein in these behaviors. We need a lot more bylaw officers. I'm wondering if we have a 2.9% property tax increase, will we be able to hire very many more bylaw officers?
Mr. Mayor, so I've been working closely, obviously, with Pierre, Ryan, and Roger. So just for clarity, 2.9 is a component, that's the tax levy, which is about 48 to 52% of our revenue stream. We also have the user fee revenues. So that's the other dimension that we'll layer in from the bylaw pressure perspective. So they're going to be increasing their user fees. So between the two, right now there is additional bylaw officers on the page. I can't comment to the final number that will be in the table of documents because we're not there yet in terms of the overall budget process, but the plan is to come forward with some additional bylaw resources.
I'm cynical because we've heard in past about new bylaw enforcement officers on things like vacant properties, on various different regimes that we've put in place. And yet I hear week after week from residents about inadequate enforcement on things like dogs, property standards, illegal Airbnbs, illegal zoning zoning infractions that have to be investigated by bylaw. And I've heard the same thing for years. And we need a very significantly larger number of bylaw officers. And if you're not prepared to tell me today that that's going to be possible within a 2.9% property tax increase, it's certainly what I expected to hear, but it's a reason why I think we should not be capping our budget at 2.9%. Waste pickup. I continue to field the requests from residents month after month for a greatly expanded organics waste pickup in our parks program. It's been expanding, a park here, a park there, but it's not going as quickly as residents would like. And I'm wondering if we implement a 2.9% tax increase, are we going to be able to really greatly expand our organics in parks collection program?
So Mr. Mayor, I'll go first and then Alan, you can top me up, but the waste program, that's part of the solid waste component of the budget. So that will be part of the increase there. And I do believe that is in that, right? The park pickup. So that's the increase of 7% as per the solid waste long range financial plan in the direction.
So a 7% increase in the solid waste master plan. So there's no additional revenues, general revenues going into Parks and Recreation's budget for waste pickup?
Mr. Mayor, Alana, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's you do the pickup for parks, right?
That's correct. So how much additional revenue if you stay within the cap that council is providing you, how much additional pickup do you anticipate that you'll be able to do in 2025?
So, Mr. Mayor, we've already expanded the parks pilot. And also, if you recall, when we brought forward the solid waste master plan that was approved by council, One of the strategies and the actions in the master plan is also to expand, move away from a pilot to really implementing basically greater diversion in parks. So what you're going to see over time is more and more parks having multi-stream, including green bins. Okay. I'm again cynical. I don't think I'm willing to go along with the caps that we're talking about in the budget today, because expansion is being put to me in very sort of nebulous terms here. It's going too slowly for residents, and it has an impact on the parks when our parks are full of pizza boxes and things like that. When we're sending a lot of the waste out to Trail Road that could be into our organics program or recycled, it's going too slowly. And I don't get any confidence today that it's going to be expanded to the degree that residents expect. Are we going to be able to, within a 2.9% tax target, significantly expand the number of hours at our pools, particular outdoor pools with lifeguards?
Mr. Mayor, within the 2.9%, there isn't an expansion of the FTEs or the operating hours for pools. However, as most councillors would know, we will come prepared at budget with some options. Some councillors have already asked us to work options for beaches, wading pools, outdoor pools, and we'll come prepared with what incremental costs to add hours or days or weeks to the program.
Yeah. So within 2.9%, though, it's going to be difficult to significantly expand those hours across the city. It is September, forgive me, 16th. It's going to feel like 30 degrees today. And we need to respond to the impacts of climate change on the quality of life for Ottawa residents. Those are my questions. Those are just a few areas where I receive mail week after week, month after month, where residents are seeing this city is not providing the services that they want and expect. And I cannot support an approach that caps us at 2.9% off the top. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. Councillor Bernard.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the budget directions report. I wanted to go back to a motion that council had passed previously that I referenced during the delegation, and it asked for budget directions to be updated to reflect the council term of priorities, including the consideration of an alternative and more strategic approach that targeted budget increases for areas deemed as a priority through term of council priorities, as well as setting those estimates to identify the funding allocated in the budget for the implementation of our strategic priorities. I'm wondering why we don't have that today. The 2.9% is across the board again, and we haven't said that there might be different priorities based on levels of service for OCH, for library, for OPH. I also see in there we've got, say, fares at 2.9%, or the levy increase 2.9%. So we're kind of sticking to that one number when we know there's different needs based on different areas, and despite council having passed a motion unanimously to look at doing that. So I'm wondering, why we're here today on that 2.9%. It strikes me as arbitrary.
So, Mr. Mayor, so 2.9 is what's before you for the recommendation. If that's what council adopts, that's what we'll table a budget at. When it comes to actual allocation, that's what's before you from a recommendation to the boards, Ottawa Police, Ottawa Public Health, and Ottawa Public Library, which is aligned to the term of council governance. Internally within the citywide service and the departments, we do not arbitrarily allocate 2.9 to each department. We go through a very onerous process, as I mentioned, and the term of council priorities is the focal point of the investments. And you'll see that in the table documents, as you've seen for 23 and 24. For the transit component of the directions, obviously that's very different than what we've seen in the past, and it's not unilaterally allocating the 2.9. It's no less than as the bottom end from a levy perspective. So again, it's aligned to the council governance, and if council chooses not to allocate that to the boards, then that's the direction I'll take. But again, unilaterally, it's not applied internally, but that's what's before you from a recommendation to the boards.
And I just want to be clear. So, OPH, the library, they've come forward and said, look, that's all we need is 2.9%, or you said you're getting that, that's what you got to live with? How does it work?
So Mr. Mayor, so we haven't got that final process in terms of what their recommendation would be from their boards. The other component is the service review framework. This is endorsed by our colleagues and our board members. And as I've demonstrated in the last two budgets endorsed by council, there's been significant savings brought forward. So I would assume that the boards would also follow that diligence as well. So the levy is one piece of the pie. The user fee is another piece of the pie. The service review and continuous improvements is another piece of the pie. So until we get through the next 6-7 weeks between now and tabling the final documents, we'll have all those details in terms of what that looks like from a board perspective, OPH, OPL, and OPS.
And I guess, usually what we set out now, that's usually what they remain at. I haven't seen them change drastically in the past. So it's a concern for me that remains outstanding. Why don't we speak more to our strategic priorities in the budget directions, as one of the delegates talked about? There are a number of things not mentioned here that are council strategic priorities that we could go into more detail on.
And Mr. Mayor, as I mentioned in my presentation, the framework and the purpose of the directions report is really give staff that framework and the fence for us to develop all those details. In the directions report, I do speak to the term of council priorities. I do speak to climate change. It's not meant to be what you're going to see in the table documents. So this is basically giving us the guardrails so we can actually table those detailed documents in November. That's what the transmittal report will do, and that's what the details you'll receive with the additional reports and documentation that we've developed this term of council. We created that new budget magazine, which really fleshed out term of council priorities, how the budget actually aligns to those investments. So that's all the documentation that you're going to see in the transmittal process and reports. Again, the direction is really for us to get the framework endorsement from council so I can do that work and have staff do that work to get to that point.
I suppose what it would be helpful for me as a councillor to see in the future would be more of a description of these are the council strategic priorities, and here's the areas we're going to focus on, especially with the new strategic initiatives department that's been launched. Be helpful to have, I guess, more information at this point to say, even though the tax increase is 3%, here's the areas that we're going to be really targeting within those strategic priorities. And I think council has passed a motion that speaks to that. I appreciate the answers. I did want to go into the surplus we had in 2024. So is the city in a financial crisis not of our own making, or are we doing okay?
Mr. Mayor, so it's a forecasted surplus on the citywide tax supported services and the rate services. What you would have seen last week at Transit Commission was the transit forecast. Not so rosy, not rosy at all. Forecasted deficit of $26 million. So again, the financial challenges is what we brought forward on September 4th. So from a citywide perspective, we've been able to implement some discretionary spending freezes, hiring pause, mitigate, leverage some of our investment income to really kind of control that side. On the transit side, we just don't have that flexibility in terms of the shortfall there. And that's why you're seeing a $25.6 million forecasted deficit at commission last week.
On the transit directions, has an analysis been done on how each of those elements would affect ridership?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Mayor. Yes. And we know that when we cut the service, for sure we will lose some customers. But we know as well that when fare increases, we don't necessarily lose customers because the priority for our customers is the service. If the service is good, they will come no matter what the cost is.
Yeah, when there was a survey done last year by myself, Councillor Leeper and Councillor Troster, but it was across the city. We had 2,200 responses from right across the city. And by far, the biggest request from people when it came to transit was service increases, and that people want to take it with more service. But when you're raising fares and reducing service, that's where people have a tough time. So in this case, it doesn't seem like these are very realistic transit directions. 75%, fare increase, 37% levy increase. These are things that aren't likely to come to pass, I would imagine. So how are you going to get to a figure that makes sense for the city of Ottawa, what's your plan to get to something that makes sense? Are you just waiting to see what money we get in from the federal government and provincial government and then adjusting from there? Is your intent to put most of it on the back of riders? What is the intent, I suppose, and the plan going forward from city staff on the transit directions?
Mr. Mayor, so it's important to note that every one of the directions from the levy to the fare to the 0 to 120 million, we wanted to keep that consistent. So we truly, at an apple with an apple comparison in terms of what the impacts were on the specific levers. How much we dial those levers, that's the work that we're continuously doing, continuously in consultation with the working group. And we'll come back with, what we deem from the staff and that working group deems as a reasonable lever pool, depending on what occurs in the next 6 to 7 weeks before tabling.
Yeah, and I can appreciate that answer. It's also a challenge for a councillor because we're getting emails saying, look at $6 transit fare. I'm not taking the bus or transit with that anymore, right? So, and I don't think that it's realistic that would be the case, but that's what it says in the document as a potential. I want to come back to the holes that we're facing. The infrastructure master plan identified a big hole in our budget, $3.8 billion commitments that we need over time. Is this budget directions and is the low amount, the 2.5 to 2.9, is that consistent with what our city documents say about the need in the future around things like our infrastructure deficit?
Mr. Mayor, so we're coming forward in June, July timeframe of 2025 with the updated long-range financial plans. And those are the financial strategies that we'll present at that time. As a reminder, through legislation and provincial legislation changes, we're going through this revised journey, if you will, in terms of the requirement for the asset management plans. And now we've kind of checked the boxes on that component. The next step is now to bring forward the funding strategies for those revised asset management plans. Going back to 2018, when we brought forward the long-range financial plan for rate and tax, we brought forward a funding strategy that was endorsed, and we've addressed those funding strategies. From the rate side, we closed the gap. Again, keep in mind that the goalpost has changed because of provincial legislation. The tax gap will be closed through this budget, a little residual amount remaining for the next budget, but we're still on track to close that. But fundamentally, to your question, these funding strategies, as per the new rules, will be brought forward in June, July timeframe with the updated long-range financial plans.
I appreciate that. I appreciate staff's work. I guess I have more of a problem with the political priorities here, Mayor. Right now, I have trouble getting community centers funded. I had to fund one through CIL myself because the city didn't have money to do it, and the feds weren't kicking in. There's another community center that needs a renewal. Right now, there's no money for it except for some matching funds if the community can manage to raise some meager funds. We're struggling on things like bathrooms and parks. We can't keep them open on the infrastructure side. They exist, they're there, but they're closed. Splash pad closures, the pools, these are things that sidewalk repairs. We're having a lot of issues keeping up with basic services. And so I have a lot of trouble with the across the board 2.9% approach. And I've got a lot of trouble with the way the transit directions are outlined here. So it's not something I'm going to be able to support today, Mayor, but I appreciate staff's work, of course, and I'll always work with them through the budget. I reserve the chance to potentially change that vote at council, depending on how the budget turns out. But right now, I'm not supporting the directions as they are, because I think others need some more funding that we're not seeing here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gower.
Thanks, Mayor. We've been able to access special funds mostly for infrastructure from other levels of government, like the Building Faster Fund. We're receiving $37.5 million this year. So two parts to my question. First is, how does that funding factor into our forecasting for this year, for 2024?
Mr. Mayor, so there was a memo released just a couple of weeks ago in terms of how that's being funded. So that's on the capital side. So that's incremental money that we had come in through that fund, and now we've allocated that to those projects as per the memo in terms of additional projects that we can now do and deliver.
But I guess did we budget for that or assume we'd have that when we did our budgeting last fall? Or I guess I'm trying to figure out whether we receive that money or not. How does it factor into our budget report?
So, Mr. Mayor, those projects that were outlined in that memo is basically, we're now advancing those projects. So as more revenue streams come in or more funding comes in year, it gives us the ability to advance something that wasn't in the approved budget.
And are we making any assumptions going into 2025 around what we think we're going to receive for next year?
Mr. Mayor, no, we don't use that assumption in terms of in the budget itself. We're required to put forward a balanced budget. So the assumptions on that would be a little bit, what I would say, a little bit on the risk side. But obviously, if more money comes in, we'll come back with the memo in terms of how that advances projects.
I guess I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity to look at some of that potential funding as a way to fill our $120 million transit budget challenge.
Mr. Mayor, that's always at the discretion of council if they choose to reallocate some of that funding that's been put forward for the recommendation of the projects that was in that memo.
Okay, but you're not counting on that right now because it's tied to housing growth numbers. Okay. One of the directions on the transit side is operating efficiencies and/or service reductions. I recall when the mayor made his initial press conference announcement in August that the idea around service reductions was not limited to transit, that we may have to look at other service reductions citywide. Are we still considering that, or is there anything in the, well, are we still considering service reductions elsewhere to be able to transfer more money to the transit budget?
Mr. Mayor, at this point, so the transit levy fares and those directions are exclusively for transit. It's not practice for us to take the non-transit levy components from the citywide services as an example and move over. So from a citywide perspective, there's no plan to make any service cuts, is to make that budget work within an allocation. On the transit side, we're trying to use all those levers to bring forward a tabled balanced budget.
Okay. And if I can be incredibly optimistic and think that we will get all $120 million from the federal government, is there anything, or provincial government, is there anything procedurally that would limit us from going above and beyond that? Like 120 million is sort of the bare minimum that we need to maintain the current level of service. Would we still have the option as a council to increase fares or increase the tax levy or other levers to further increase our transit budget?
Mr. Mayor, that is correct. If we get just one of those levers, the other levers can still move in terms of what that could look like from additional things.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Gower. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning. Looking at Canadian inflation rates the past few years, 2020 was 0.7%, 2021 3.4%, 2022 6.8%, and 2022 3.9%. So the tax increases, property tax increases we've imposed here in Ottawa have been approximately or less than half of the inflation rate. So we've, our purchasing power has not even kept par with those inflationary increases. So staff is aware of the many challenges that members of council brought to their attention. I came with my list of concerns in my ward and across the city, not to mention them all, the infrastructure deficit you've heard already today, operating deficits, park renewal, sidewalks, renovation of community centers, more staff needed for wading pools, beaches, a million tree planting plan, et cetera, et cetera. How did you come with a number of 2.9%? It's a 0.4 difference between last year's property tax increase. You're aware of many outstanding underfunded budget lines. How did you get 2.9 and not some other number? It would seem that the net difference in tax revenue that this would bring in would just barely touch the long list of concerns, legitimate concerns that exist. So can you explain how 2.9 was developed?
Mr. Mayor, I mean, I'll kick off as I'll speak to the consumer price index and inflation overall. And this is one of the things that we brought forward in the last two budgets, which was what I call it a little bit of a new feature in the directions report, and we kind of speak to it more in the transmittal report and the budget documents. All of our services aren't subject to the global CPI rate. We break down, if you go to page 8 of the directions report, we do provide a little summary table in terms of the various components of the inflationary impacts, the main ones, our main one being compensation. And we have several other levers as well that we kind of look at, the weighted average of that rate versus the actual percentage of the budget. Ultimately, those are reviews that we go forward as we've been working through the budget process. And then in consultation with the mayor is the one that puts forward the recommendation for the levy increase.
Thank you for that explanation. Just on that table, 2.5% for compensation. That's, I'll park my thoughts on that. Heating, 0%. So I'd like you to explain that. And on the following pages, construction, inflationary, you're budgeting a 2% increase only. That seems very low, but on construction, 2% and heating at 0, how did you get those numbers?
Mr. Mayor, the other component of the utilities is the consumption side of the equation. So that's where we've seen a reduction in our consumption in the past couple of years. That's why we're demonstrating a 0% increase. Again, applying just a flat percentage increase to our base budget would inflate the budgets, to be honest. If you look at the fuel as an example, we're actually seeing what I would call a pretty good increase, or not a pretty good, but an increase. We do edge our contracts. So last year we did have the ability to leverage lower rates. So when we look at the actual inflation, we look at rates in terms of the percentage, but we also look at the consumption side. On the capital side, 2%, really that goes back to the other process that I speak to, and you hear me speak to it throughout the budget process, is our capital closure process. So the last 2 years we've used, again, we haven't leveraged the actual CPI, we've used a lower rate. And through the capital closure process, if there's any fluctuations or pressures on projects in flight or adopted projects, we address it through the closure of the old legacy projects. So again, that's how we take a little bit of risk on that component.
For the police services levy, the motion 2.2A II, it's recommended as 2.9%. Has the chief been consulted on this number, or is this what council will eventually provide the board, and it'll be up to them to structure their budget based on the direction provided?
Mr. Mayor, so yes, we've had a discussion with the Ottawa Police Services, the chief and the CAO there. Ultimately, this will go through their process in terms of what they put forward for their board to endorse.
I know we have a few members of council who serve on the board, but my main question is, again, given what we've heard for years about how the police are struggling to keep their heads above water, how the chief and board can defend a 2.9% increase. So given what's not being provided to the public, I will be seeking further explanation through the budget process from the OPS on the amount that they deem appropriate to serve the people of Ottawa. Finally, my attention will turn to the transit matter 2B of the motion, and I just want to better understand the breakdown of various components in the B part. So if, worst case scenario, there's no additional funds coming from provincial and federal governments, does that mean the transit levy and fare increase to the maximums, or are you providing all the options, and at the end of the day, it's going to be a potential mixture of all of them, but it doesn't mean we go to the maximum for each component?
Mr. Mayor, that is correct. What you'll have is what I'll frame as an endorse as the working group continues. We'll bring forward, a variety of the different levers in terms of what that looks like, and that's what you'll get in terms of the details.
Assuming, just for the sake of this discussion, that the majority of council couldn't swallow a 75% increase in transit fares, would it be best for you to have that before council makes a decision, or at the point council makes a decision later this week? So you would have a better clarified set of directions. I just don't want to get to the point where, this is potentially approved. You have this very huge range for potential components that frankly are not palatable to my residents, at least. And I wouldn't want to give you sort of a false acceptance that these are okay when in fact they're not. So I'm just trying to talk this out and maybe you can help clarify for me.
Mr. Mayor, it's going to be a challenge. I mean, this is unusual. The key for me and staff is having the lower limit. So at least that gives us the ability to, okay, address those. This is the lower limit, and then we see what our gap is, and then from there, in working in consultation with the working group, figure out, you know, how much of the lever we want to dial, and we'll table a document that basically has those levers broken out. So if there's an incremental levy of A, we'll have a document, we'll have a line that shows that, and the corresponding fare, et cetera, et cetera. So council can make an informed decision where if they want to dial back a certain lever, they know what the impact is for the other lever to dial back up or to close that gap. So not a usual scenario, but that's the work that we got to do between now and tabling to give council and committee that level of detail.
No, I appreciate that. And just so my colleagues were like, you know, additional service reductions. We've just gone through the 2023 bus route review. That's just not palatable at all with my residents. Fare discount adjustments. You know, we don't have to get into the weeds today, but I'm certainly curious what staff are thinking in that regard. So what I'm struggling today is, do I want to give staff directions on matters I can't support to begin with? Because I think it's best from the beginning, if I'm going to support a direction, it's something that I can eventually support, or do I give staff the flexibility
That's time, Councillor.
that there are multiple options to consider, come back with your draft, and then we have an opportunity through committee and council to make changes there. So that's what I'm wrestling with. But thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Just as a quick follow-up to that, though, obviously the final decision about any of those would be at budget time with the full city council, correct?
Mr. Mayor, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Luloff.
Thank you very much. And thanks for the report and the good discussion today. A lot of the points that I would raise outside of my wearing the chair of the Ottawa Public Library Board hat have and will be made. I'm certain. I see that, you know, Councillor Tierney and Councillor Kitts have their hands up and always do a very good job alongside us representing the East End. So I'll concentrate on the library file for my 5 minutes. What discussions does city staff have with staff both internally and those of other boards regarding their needs and expectations? I hear that there's been discussions with the police chief, but is that sort of discussion happening prior to setting directions with other boards as well?
Mr. Mayor, we do have a check-in with the boards in terms of, you know, where their financial results are, like our Q2 results. We did meet with the Ottawa Police Services last week, and I do have a meeting with Ottawa Public Library this week, I believe, might be today or tomorrow. So that's the work that, and we continuously have consultation with Ottawa Public Health as well. So we do have dedicated finance staff that works with Ottawa Public Health and Ottawa Public Library from the city side as well to kind of help them or kind of understand their pressures and needs.
So you haven't had the meeting yet with library staff to ask what their needs are for next year. That's to come.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. If I understand correctly, the directions of a 2.9% tax rate increase plus a presumed 1.5% taxation growth means that the Ottawa Public Library will see a total envelope increase of 2.715 million. So it's the 1.8 million for the tax increase and $915,000 respectively. So perhaps I'll give you a preview of the conversation that you'll have later today or tomorrow. As my colleagues are aware, OPL is in a period of expansion, unlike any that it's undertaken in the past. The construction of Adisoke, the stunning facility that will house the new central library branch of OPL, is over 60% complete, and it remains on schedule and on budget. We've heard that before, but this time it's true. This is a very good news story for Ottawa, and it's set to open in summer 2026. And I want to thank every single one of my colleagues that have come out to take a look at this stunning building as it's being built. And if anybody else is interested in coming on a tour, I'd be glad to do that work for you. Staff have been hard at work on service planning, and as ever, they're focused on what they genuinely need to animate the space and deliver the full promise of Adisoke. And I can tell you that the proposed direction of 2.9 makes this extremely challenging, if not impossible. And to be clear, OPL is delivering Central without compromising services across the city, and has been transparent with the board that they are working with city finance on planning for operations with a multi-year process. We began last year. The investments that we've made in construction are significant. Madasoke is a true example of city building, of sustainability and accessibility, and of Indigenous reconciliation. To limit operational expansion to 2.9% or 2.7 million shortchanges operations in a way that's entirely out of scope with the significance of this project and the investments made so far. And it limits OPL at a critical moment, right when we need to be staffing up and training for a successful opening. We cannot have another instance of investing significantly in infrastructure and capital without making commensurate operational investments. I'll also point out that the Ottawa Public Library's budget represents less than 2% of the city's overall budget. The real cost of doing this right, of adequately operationalizing this investment and delivering what was promised, is likely the best value for money for taxpayers. We've consistently asked for less than what budget directions have recommended, and we've offered better service year over year. Our board has demonstrated a history of fiscal responsibility and delivering real value for tax dollars. Next year, we'll open a stunning facility that will be the backbone of our entire 33-branch system. Let's not shortchange the greatest leveler we have in our city, a truly free and democratic institution, our public library. The board will be firm and honest about what we need following our process, regardless of the directions passed today. So I think that you've got what you need to go into your meeting with library staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Luloff. I'm going to go to committee members first and then other councillors. So Councillor Tierney.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say thanks to staff. It's always the Christmas season for you guys, quite literally almost. And, I saw some good indicators that the economists anticipate that we're going to be at a 2.1% rate. That's the lowest since, March 2021. So I don't want to jinx anything, but I think we've weathered a very big storm and been very fiscally responsible to this point. So hopefully that bodes well as the rest of the year goes on and we can continue to watch the rates. I did want to, I wasn't aware this was going to be more of a Festivus poll style discussion today. I thought we were just talking about the rates, but I'll stick to the actual guidance, because that's what this is all about. It's guidance. I mean, I don't go in and say, whatever rate you wish, go ahead, departments. I think we all think certain departments deserve a little more and a little less. We have to put our water in our wine on occasion to be able to make it work. I guess one of my questions I've always really wanted to see is options. I would love to see a couple of options come back with the set target about what that might look like. And I'll give you an example. We have what is the stereotypical defined municipal core services. And we know that's all changed. We know it's all changed, and we've been preaching about that, and we need other levels of government. But when it comes to potholes and roads, which we hear about quite a bit, snow plowing, core service doing a great job, policing, lawn mowing and boulevards, can we have a couple of options, the balanced approach, the core services approach, come back to us? I know it's a lot of extra work, but that might alleviate some of the stress of I want, forgetting that we're collectively trying to work together. Is that even an option?
Mr. Mayor, that would be an enormous amount of work to even create different options. You've heard me say before, our budget is one of the most detailed budgets that I'm aware of from a municipal context perspective. The core is that we will table a budget with no service cuts to our core operations. That's the core. That's the framework that we'll be bringing forward. So that's the direction I'll take. If council endorses this, our committee endorses this and council on Wednesday, that's what we're going to build. We're going to build the budget and finalize the budget with my colleagues in terms of no service impacts or cuts.
Okay, great. And I always ask this question and people are always like, why do you keep asking about this? The impact assessment has been held off for, we're getting, I think, close to a decade now. It's been quite a long time. Has the province indicated where, if any, movement's going to happen on that? Because all these things have a snowball effect. And I know we always like to say, oh, yeah, but it's, one city, we don't get more money and all that. I get that. But again, certain neighborhoods are going to get targeted extra hard based on whatever happens, because they're the hot spot, livable communities, it could be near transit, whatever the case may be. And their 2.9%, if we settle on that, it's going to be very different on their market value of their homes. So have we had an indication from the province on that at this point?
Mr. Mayor, so you're right, Councillor. 2016 was the last time the assessment was done. There's been a number of times year over year in the past 8 years, I guess, now that we've thought that it was coming. At this point, I'll say I'll believe it when I see it when that comes. So
Okay.
we have no indication of in terms of a defined timeline or date at this point.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And it's got to be hard for you guys to be able to even budget when you don't know the unknown. So I may go back on the board, Mr. Mayor, but I just wanted to thank staff. This is a very complex time of year. You have 24 cats plus the mayor around the table, and we all want certain things. So to bring it together is a lot of work, and look forward to it. And I will be supporting the direction because as a matter of fact, I think it's something you have to do. If you just say go to town, and I could foresee a much larger number. And remember, you do one large increase in 1 year, that's built in forever. That goes forward. So I think we've done a good job at keeping it where we're at. So thank you again.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney. Councillor Kitts, Vice Chair Kitts, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to put my OPH chair hat on quickly. This evening, the board will be receiving a report on the 2025 budget planning and considerations for Ottawa Public Health, and I don't want to preempt that conversation, but I do want to salute the team at OPH as the city has been undergoing its own service review. OPH has also independently been working tremendously hard to identify its budget pressures and restructure roles to better align with priorities. That said, when contemplating growth opportunities that include wide variety of services, but health inspections, emergency preparedness, our neighborhood wellness hubs, among other things, OPH has identified approximately 11.6 million in budget pressures till 2027. Now, the province is undergoing a funding formula review. So we are hopeful that those growth opportunities will be advanced through that process. So OPH is prepared to present a balanced budget using provincial-based funding growth at 1% and also incorporating the province's increase in Healthy Babies, Healthy Children funding, which is to Ottawa specifically, which is something I have been fiercely advocating for. So that's a definite good news story. But what is important for this group to know is that it is also presenting a balanced budget is also contingent on the city covering the cost of living adjustment in the 2025 budget, as it has in years past. That support from the city has helped OPH maintain and not have to reduce services while demand grows. So Cyril, I know your team has been working closely with OPH's financial team. I just wanted to confirm that those conversations about cost of living adjustment are continuing.
Mr. Mayor, that is correct, yes.
Okay, thank you for that. So going back to the budget at large, I was out in the community a lot this weekend. I had a lot of conversations about what's in front of us, even at a wedding I was at on Saturday night. It was what everyone wanted to talk to me about. So perhaps to share an alternative perspective to some of the comments we heard around the table today, I predominantly heard a lot of concern about an increase to property taxes. And I don't think that's surprising coming from a ward like mine. Per the TMP's 2022 Origin Destination Survey, 4% of Ward 19 uses transit. And that's because there's no efficient transit available. And it's only down 3% from 2011 when only 7% used transit. And to Councillor Leaper's points about outdoor pools being open and library hours being extended, Ward 19 doesn't have any outdoor pools and it doesn't have any libraries. And I've already rhymed off at this table in the past what it's like being a rural resident. No city water, no sewer, no sidewalks, no streetlights. When I put my address into the OC Transpo travel planner, it says route not available. You know, and as Councillor Turney was saying, cost of living has been high. It's still high. Seniors on a fixed income are stressed for sure about what a significant tax hike could mean for them. And I do want to be clear, I couldn't agree more that increasing transit fares is going to work against what we're trying to do to attract more people to the transit system. Cutting service, I think, is even worse. And I don't want to give the impression, but I don't want to give the impression that increasing taxes significantly is the easy answer. And it will be a very hard pill to swallow for residents in wards like mine that don't have services that other parts of the city enjoy. So, you know, I want to continue to applaud you, Mr. Mayor, for fighting for funding from other levels of government. I hope everyone read the Ontario Financial Accountability Office's report that confirmed Ottawa is set to see the steepest decline of anywhere in the province when it comes to per resident subsidies for transit from the provincial government. Ottawa coming in at about $60 when the provincial average is 111, and paling in comparison to Toronto, which is at almost $200 per resident. So I hope that that is adding weight to our argument on transit, of course, in addition to the PILT payment situation. And coming full circle here, you know, at OPH, we aren't letting the province off the hook on the responsibilities that they have to fund and what they should be responsible for. And I think we need to do that the same as a city. So I appreciate that these directions are going to give us all the information so that we can have these difficult conversations. I think asking for a broad list of possibilities is the right move at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Kitts. I'll go next to Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Along the same theme as Councillor Kitts, I think this is the right direction, and I think this is the right direction for a bunch of reasons. Number one, I will remind everyone that voters in this city voted for a candidate. 90% of voters voted for a candidate that would keep taxes to about 3%. So first of all, that's a really important point, that most people were happy to be 2.5 to 3%. So, you know, when you're mayor, I think you want to make sure that you are putting giving weight to that. The second thing I would say is that there's a council approved fiscal framework, and it's council approved. And the first principle of it is respect for the taxpayer. And one of the meanings of respect for the taxpayer is fair and equitable treatment by other orders of government. And the mayor was out in Canada North and Stittsville and many other places this weekend. And it was, I was so happy to see how many people out on the street were saying to the mayor, keep going, good for you. You know, you need to make sure that the other levels of government are paying their fair share. And I was super impressed with how much people are paying attention. First of all, they really are. And then that was the message they were sending to the mayor. You know, you keep going exactly where you're going. This is what we want to see. And, you know, if you think about it, just strategically, why would we come out with a direction that is, you know, 10%? When we're trying to say we're not going to put the burden on taxpayers, we expect the other levels of government will put forward what they need to put forward. So, I mean, I think that what we're saying is if they don't, things will be difficult. But nonetheless, we're respecting the taxpayer based on what our fiscal framework tells us to do. The other thing I would say is, you know, earlier the word was used that 2.9 is arbitrary. And it's funny because I never think like 2.9 would be seen as arbitrary. You know, 7%, 10%, I hear councillors talking about. I think those are arbitrary numbers. And I think that maybe comes from the fact that it's hard for councillors to see what goes on in the background. And it's a benefit to be on that working group for sure, that you get more and more insight into how numbers are arrived at. It's not arbitrary. And I think that is definitely the wrong word to ever use when it comes to a city budget that's highly complex. Councillor Kitts mentioned that article over the weekend. That was very powerful. Right, you know, confirming that, you know, we do know what we're talking about. We are not properly funded, and other cities get a lot more than we do. So I think this is the right direction. And again, I will just sort of emphasize the fact that it's a direction. and we will see what it looks like. And just to answer Councillor Brockington's comment on the Police Services Board budget, certainly the Police Services Board will be looking at this and determining how we can work with it as well. One last point, I guess, maybe because Councillor Carr and the mayor and I are on that committee, but $150 million in efficiencies is no laughing matter. So, we need to remember that. And when Cyril talks about how we are more efficient and our energy use is going down, that makes a difference, right? And so we have groups come out and say, what are we doing in terms of the environment? Well, that's a big one right there. We are using less energy, which translates into less costs. So anyway, I agree with the direction, and I look forward to seeing exactly what it looks like.
Thank you, Councillor Curry. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The budget process is always complex and so many moving pieces. Speaking of moving transit, one of the things that concerns me, despite the fact that I've got a major construction project going through my ward of stage 2, the bus service is absolutely crucial. And that is what most people focus on. And I'm concerned about the future of the Equipass community bus passes. We've froze those rates back in 2019, and we've continued to froze those rates. I think it's absolutely essential that we look at considering it. Is there any possibility we can expand these passes, work with Ottawa Community Housing, for example, and get more riders by promoting and these passes to bring up our ridership?
Mr. Mayor, there's always that possibility. I think that's something that will be discussed as part of the working group in terms of, again, another one of the levers that we're looking at. We were quite clear that we're looking at anything and everything, and in some cases, new ideas pop up throughout the journey, and we'll look at that for consideration for sure.
Thank you. I have raised it before, but I think that we have to make it easier to apply for these passes and look at opportunities to expand them. This is going to be positive for so many people. Many people in Ottawa Community Housing have had to purchase cars because they feel they can't get around otherwise. And yet many can qualify for community and Equipasses. It's not perfect, but I would urge us to work together on that and get more ridership. I have to respond to the comments earlier about the city and building affordable housing. I think it's well looked after with Ottawa Community Housing. As chair, I can say that we're working together, and we're going to continue to build our relationship with the city. There's no doubt that it's not profitable. It is a nonprofit. But the fact that we're building more housing is super important, and it has a positive effect on our budget because it's housing more people. More vulnerable people getting housing is going to have a domino effect on all our other services. So just wanted to raise that. I'm concerned about subsidies to sports facilities and arenas. When we need to invest in our community facilities, such as rinks. I've discovered that life cycle renewal has become less than reliable, and a facility can reach its end of its expected life and there's no funds to replace it. This has happened recently with us in Bay Ward with the Belltown Dome. I'm concerned about what has been put aside for life cycle renewal. I realize this is not the point we're discussing now, but it's obvious that those funds are dwindling and we're not able to replace what we have, particularly in the core urban areas. So I want to know what we're doing to work to get those reserves back so that we can replace facilities such as a Belltown Dome.
Mr. Mayor, so that's what I spoke to just a little bit earlier there in terms of the long-range financial plan. We're going to bring those forward in June, July of 2025, aligning to the new legislative asset management plans that were before you back in May and June of this year. So that's where the revised funding strategy will come forward as part of this new shift and change in legislation from an asset base.
this is something that is happening slowly over years, and we're left without it being able to replace things that are coming to the end of their life cycle. We're going to be finding this more and more, especially since we cannot rely totally on development charges. And that's particularly problematic in areas where it's not new growth, but replacement. So I just want to make sure that we look at this very seriously, because we've got a lot coming up, especially with intensification. And we need not just replacing, but improving facilities that are in our urban areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Bradley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to staff for the presentation. Most of my questions have been answered at this point, but I do want to say 2.9% does seem arbitrary, and I think that is an appropriate word based on what we've heard today. We've heard that the library board has not yet been consulted. We've heard that Ottawa Public Health has raised some concerns and has not been fully consulted, that Ottawa Police has not been fully consulted, that a lot of the service areas that we have prioritized as a council have not been included. Councillor Leeper had mentioned bylaw as one, which my residents share those concerns. There's no mention of our strategic priorities within the document itself, and transit doesn't even encompass that 2.9% and will likely increase by the time we vote on a budget. So yes, I would say 2.9% is entirely arbitrary without all of those points considered. Another colleague mentioned that this is a guidance document, but that's just it, it's guidance. It needs to be informed and rooted in our real fiscal challenges and reflective of our residents' priorities. I don't want to give you poor guidance that will then set our city up for failure, and our residents will be disappointed by the outcome when they don't see the services they want reflected in the budget. So I have a few questions, but I do think that arbitrary is an appropriate word. This question is for Cyril. Our long-range financial plan for transit, when are we expected to receive that?
Mr. Mayor, that's planned for, again, around that May, June timeframe of 2025.
So can I ask, I think it was in late 2024 or 2023, sorry, where we had got a state of transit update. Why has it taken so long for us to receive the long range financial plan? Because this deficit is not a surprise to many of us who've been following this closely. And it would seem that having a plan in place, which we could rely on to set ourselves up for success, would be really helpful as part of these budget discussions. And now it just feels like we're pulling solutions from here and there and hoping our partners come to the table. Why do we not have it now?
Mr. Mayor, because the extensive work that's been ongoing, we briefed council in September of 2023 in terms of the impacts to the LRFP. Through the budget process, we struck up the working group, and the intent of that working group was to support inputs into the updated transit long-range financial plan. The transit long-range financial plan will not be a solution of 1 year. That's going to be a solution that's broadcast over 20, 30 years on the horizon. And that's a complexity. It's just not an easy task to do in terms of all the updates. As you saw before you in my presentation and the presentation last week or 2 weeks ago at council, there's a myriad of levers that we're working through. So every one of those has significant impacts and significant amount of work. And I don't want to lose sight of all the work that staff has done. This has been a very, very, very strenuous amount of effort on staff. So it's important to not discount that in terms of the time it will take to do that. So that's the reality. It's just because of the complexities, because of the level of details and the number of things that we're reviewing, that's why it's taken a little longer than our normal long-range financial process that we would bring back to council.
No, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate all the work that staff have done. And I heard you say earlier in this meeting that staff have been working on this budget essentially since we approved the 2024 budget, which is why I'm a little bit surprised that our budget directions around transit and closing that gap aren't a bit more firm at this stage. If we've been working on it for a year and we've seen sort of the writing on the wall that we're facing such a large deficit. So could you explain to me why we don't have a little bit firmer sense of the levers that we might use to close the $120 million gap at this point?
Mr. Mayor, I think what you had before you is a pretty detailed list of the various levers. We're just not there yet in terms of how much we're going to dial those one way or the other. And that's the work that we're going to continue to do and the work that we've been doing with the working group in terms of the fairness for Ottawa as well.
Yeah, I'm a bit concerned that the levers that we're using in the range that we've given you are that we're putting too much on staff in terms of where we want to take transit as a priority as a council, that usually it would be council that would, you know, set the fare increase or would set the levy increase, and not the other way around. So are you going to come back to us with multiple options or just one recommendation as to how we close the gap?
Mr. Mayor, depending on the outcome in the coming weeks, what you'll see is, again, the key for us is the baseline. So we're using the 2.9 as a baseline, the fare as a baseline, and then we'll break out any other assumptions. So if we do have a higher transit levy, we'll have a line that shows that. We'll do the same from a fare impact. If there's additional fare impact, we'll show that. We'll show the efficiencies. We'll show any potential capital deferrals. We'll show all those. So council will have the ability to understand that if we need to, or if they choose to, dial either one of those levers, we will be able to tell you what the offsetting impact will be. So you can make an informed decision in terms of what council ultimately will direct staff to how much they turn that lever for each identifiable item.
So when we see the budget recommendation, it will be, I'm just making these numbers up, but a 2.9% fare increase, a 3% levy increase, 10% reduction in service, you know, capital works deferral, here's the plan. And then from when it's tabled to when the budget informs, if I said to you, Cyril, we want to take that fare increase down to 0, and you would tell me where you would need to make up that difference. Like, is that what we're looking at?
Mr. Mayor, correct. Yes.
Okay. Again, I don't want to diminish the work that staff have done to get us to this point. I appreciate it, but I do think that these budget directions are a bit weak and not entirely reflective of our priorities as a city, and you know, absent of a real number. And it's important, as some colleagues have pointed out, that in the past when we set a budget direction, that's usually what we end up targeting when we approve a budget. It doesn't usually stray very far from that. And right now, this message is incredibly hard to manage within the public domain because we're saying 2.9%, but that's completely absent of our transit pressure. And it's unlikely that the federal and provincial government will come to the table with the full freight amount that the gap that we need to close is. And so we're in all probability going to see a higher tax increase than 2.9%, but we're not messaging that now. And so it's difficult to manage expectations in the community. So I had hoped that we would, based on the presentation that we had received 2 weeks ago, had a more realistic budget directions for transit based on what we knew. So that is a bit of a disappointment. I don't think that I can support such a vague budget direction on transit because I feel like we're delegating too much to staff with respect to where we want to take our transit system. So, if it stays the way it is now, by the time it gets to council, I won't be able to support it, but I do appreciate the work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley. Councillor Johnson.
Good morning, everyone. So firstly, I would just like to acknowledge that although we do have voters that voted for a particular mayor, we also have voters that voted for us. And I have many voters that voted for me. And I think that one of the best things that this mayor has done since he's taken office is allowed all of us councillors to represent our constituents at this table, to speak in differing opinions with respect and acknowledgement. And so I value that, and I will continue to do so. And I don't think that that diminishes any of our process by respectfully disagreeing. So I have a couple questions in terms of the content of the report. So the first one would be, can you explain to me what a deferral of capital projects for transit might look like? Could you give me some examples of what movements we might see there?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Mayor. A good example could be if we need to replace all the shelters, we can decide to go slowly, or we can skip just 1 year.
Okay, so just to acknowledge that in Bell's Corners, we actually don't have an active transportation link between that neighborhood and the future Moody station that is currently funded. So my concern might be that for those capital projects that still don't even have funding, if we defer existing projects, we might not get to that list. My other concern might be that many of our shelters are not AODA compliant. And so when I have residents who use mobility devices that want to use a shelter, I've already been telling them that we won't be able to replace them until I don't know when. And so further reductions in or further deferrals of these solutions might negatively impact some of our vulnerable communities. I'd also like to understand, could someone explain to me what the facility rationalization process is going to look like for the new year?
Mr. Mayor, I'll start off, and Dan, if you want to top me up, you can top me up. So that's part of the review. That's been one of the ideas that's were generated through the service review framework. So I've been working closely with Dan. Dan's been working with his team as well in terms of looking at our, I'll call it the facility stock. As a reminder, in this budget or the 2023 budget, Councillor Gower brought forward a property in his ward on Purdy Street that was deemed to be surplus. So we can actually take that out of our stock. So which means we save the maintenance costs, which means we save the life cycle requirement costs, which means we can reinvest that money back into the priority facilities. So another dimension of the service review framework really is about taking, reinvesting the savings into the priorities and the core services. So more information will come as we go through that framework. Dan, I don't know if you have anything to top me up on that.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, as Cyril said, we've, for the last 2 years now, have been identifying facilities that are in most cases surplus to city needs. They tend to be aging facilities that require a lot of funding to maintain. And so we've identified those and a plan to phase them out where possible. In some cases, it's to sell the land. It's just in other cases, it's simply to eliminate the expense. There are two other aspects to it that are perhaps less related to facility decommissioning and more aligned with revenue generation. One of them is to accelerate the revenue generation from our facilities, and that is both in terms of advertising opportunities, things like billboards. We have a program for billboards that has been on pause for a while, and it's to accelerate that. And then the other one is to review the leases that are in city facilities to both standardize the lease rates that we're charging groups and making sure that everyone's on board in terms of paying those leases. So those three initiatives are three streams that are active at this point.
Thank you very much. I think we need to unpack, just as we have an opportunity. Facility rationalization could mean the divestment of properties and neighborhoods that are currently under the City of Ottawa's ownership. It's not going to be done haphazardly, but it may impact our communities, and it is part of the tough choices that we have to make considering our financial position today. So I think we all do need to watch for that as it comes through next year. I know that my residents in Nepean and other pre-amalgamation villages and cities might be interested in seeing how that works out. So, I'm not going to speak too much about how we are looking at transit. I think that's been very well covered, but I think I'd like to focus on my concerns around 2.9%, as many other have, in terms of our current service levels. And I just wanted to acknowledge that I actually, deeply believe that staff is doing everything they can. When I look at each one of the general managers, they are digging deep, they are getting creative, and they are finding solutions as best they can. But there are certain pressures that come with a lack of resources that I think can be acknowledged. So, when we look at something like park maintenance, when we look at something like the weeds that are being cut from medians. I just received an email saying that some of the weeds that I'm looking to get cut on Cordova are going to be done by the end of summer 2024 season. I think, are we there? I think we are there, but I think it's all of these little stretches that we have to make sure that these teams can get everywhere they need to go. And my concern is that we don't make the decisions that we need to make politically to support those staff that are working tirelessly and with a tremendous amount of pride for the public good. We've also seen traffic studies. They used to be collecting traffic data 48 hours in a Little Armadillo. Now they've moved down to 24 hours because those things need to move around so many times because so many people are concerned about traffic volumes and speeds. Residents expect us to be able to at least deliver on the data that they are asking us to collect, but we're edging out the quality of that data when we reduce our resources. Similarly, I have a very strong baseball community that is desperate to bring in baseball tourism, but our facilities are at a standard, which is our City of Ottawa standard and no fault of anyone's own, but they are not the quality of standard that we're seeing for play around the province. So we cannot attract these competitive tournaments because we don't have the standards of play. These are dollars that we are missing out on when it comes to tourism because our standards are such that are currently being resourced. I don't mind if we're going to make these decisions, but the way that we continue to budget towards a cap means that there is no space for new good ideas. This is about a maintaining of a status quo that residents are already dissatisfied with. So when it comes to the councillor from Little Barhaven's motion to say, let's have a proactive weed maintenance program, where is the funding going to come for that? When we want to have a permanent resource that's going to support community associations to negotiate with the CIP, where is it going to come for that? When it's going to come to the wildlife strategy and having a wildlife specialist that's literally going to be the solution to all of our wildlife problems, by the way, where's the funding going to come for that? And so all I'm suggesting is that we need to start talking about new good ideas, and these budget directions don't allow us to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Lowe.
Excuse me. Thanks, Mayor. My voice is going to sound a little weird, but I think you had touched upon this in an earlier presentation to council or to one of the committees, but I kind of want to know what are the levers that you've looked at, or what are the levers that you've looked at to sort of help determine what range, because in the transit budget you have all those ranges, right? Determine where in the ranges we might sort of fall into, or how we can mitigate the higher ends of the ranges. Like what levers, what ideas have we sort of used or discussed to try to mitigate it all?
Mr. Mayor, I think one of the slides that I'm all detailed there, so I'll try and go off memory a little bit. We're looking at the parking levy as an example. That's one that we're reviewing in terms of potential component of one of the levers that we can dial up, dial down. Even from a land perspective, are there certain parking rides that can be leveraged in terms of, sunsetting, if you will? So the full list is in the document and on the presentation that I can. Yep.
Okay, cool. Now I think I think we'll discuss this in more detail at committee, so I'll leave it for there. But it's good to know that there's been some things considered, and hopefully we can think of more by then. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lowe. Councillor Gower.
Thanks, Mayor. Just wanted to wrap up a little bit, reflecting on some of what we've heard today. First of all, I'm also glad to see this approach for the transit budget. I think it's important to put all the numbers transparently out there. I agree it's unlikely we're going to have a 75% fare increase or $120 million cut in services. But I think it's important to have those numbers out there so that councillors and residents are really clear on what those trade-offs are. Sometimes I don't think that's clear for councillors or for residents, that there is a cost to running a service, and we have to make decisions and make sure that we have the funds to cover that. Last week at Transit Commission, Councillor Leeper was musing about what a $120 million service cut would look like. And I was trying to actually put some numbers to that. It's about 14% of the entire operating budget for 2025. So that would be like just cutting service entirely on one day of the week, which is just a ridiculous idea that would prevent people from getting to work, to jobs, to hospitals, nursing homes, retail. Like there's no way we can solve this with a $120 million service cut. Or you could cut service to like 3 or 4 wards entirely. Like, again, that's just, it's not responsible budgeting. So on the fares, I think it's fair that we set the expectation now for riders. We're not getting a fare freeze this year. It's going to be at least 2.5%. And also our long range financial plan working group has been looking at all the different fare structures and discounts and so on. For example, the rate we have for high schools that we've charged school boards, does that actually cover our cost of delivering it? That may be more than 2.5%. It's probably not going to be a 75% increase, but this direction gives our staff the flexibility to come back and look at some of that fare structure and present some options to us at budget time. I think it's also important because having all this information out here now gives 3 months to be having this dialogue with residents and get feedback. We had 30 people out to Transit Commission last week giving our feedback. So it's 3 months rather than a compressed 1 month budget cycle. I think it's important. And the last thing, I was sort of getting at this when I was on earlier, we do have to look beyond just that $120 million. That's the bare minimum that we need. We have OC Transpo that's about to launch a new LRT line to the south, building lines to the east and west. We've got a e-bus procurement. We've got a new network. We've got legal challenges. We want to improve paratransport service. Like 120 million is the bare minimum that we need to meet the needs of our city to keep people moving around here. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Gower. Councillor King?
Thank you, Your Worship. After listening to the debate, I agree with a number of my council colleagues and community members that we need more direct linkages between our term of council priorities and the budget direction before us. We also need to propose the proper amount of investment necessary to fund all the things that the city does. Affordable and reliable transit. We need to ensure that it's affordable and reliable. Bylaw enforcement, affordable housing, park maintenance, resources to address our massive infrastructure deficit, and life cycle renewal for recreational facilities. I know that we heard that mentioned around the table multiple times. I know that that impacts the residents of Rideau Rockcliffe and many others around the city. We heard that property tax increases in the past have been less than half the rate of inflation, and that has been reflected in our underfunded city services. I know from when we examine the issues that we hear from residents, from poor quality pavement to poor quality park equipment, I know that my residents acknowledge that we don't live in Oz, that we live in Ottawa. They don't want their roads paved with gold. They'd just be happy with asphalt. So it's evident that we need additional, in my mind, economic analysis to better measure and inform our budget direction, especially concerning the measurement of inflation to determine the true rate of investment necessary in city services. As a consequence, I won't be supporting budget direction, but I look forward to the discussion in terms of budget options with the community, along with examining tools with city staff to improve the economic analysis required to determine how to properly fund city services. Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I just wanted to address a couple of things that have arisen over the course of discussion this morning. And we say it every year here at the table, but there's an assertion that we are not cutting service. And I think that there's different takes you can take on that. I remember when I first got elected, we had a budget for snow operations on our roads. And that was never being cut. It was growing every year in terms of absolute dollars. But at the same time, we were adding hundreds of kilometers, hundreds of lane kilometers, for which we were not taking into account when we were dealing with the snow budget. So even though the total amount that we were spending on snow operations was growing, it was growing nowhere near as quickly as the number of lane kilometers were growing. That was something with which we had to deal, and there were some fairly significant increases to the snow budget, taken with our eyes wide open, that those were well and above the rest of the budget rate of increase in order to catch up. Right? To say that there are no cuts because we're not cutting an absolute number does not mean that the level of service that we're providing to residents isn't diminishing. Last year, despite a 2.5% overall property tax increase, the number of FTEs in the city was budgeted to grow by about 1.2%. Right? We can't, the people who provide the services to the services that we offer to people are given by people. I'm not seeing an increase in the number of people as we add new subdivisions and we add lane kilometers of road, as the demands on our social service just keep skyrocketing, as we're accelerating the rate at which we're rebuilding our infrastructure, the acceleration of the rate at which we're taking on new projects. All of those require people but the number of people who are employed to deliver those services is remaining relatively stagnant. And what that means is that we are seeing a steady diminishment. It's not a cut of dollars, but it is a cut of the resources that are available in the face of population and financial pressures. The second thing, I just want to make sure that I heard the answer that was given to Councillor Gower with respect to the possibility of using some of the transit funding, other funding that is coming into the city to plug the hole in the budget. And I just want to make sure that, you know, as we're looking ahead at the potential for new funding to come in from other levels of government, that we understand that that has to be ongoing and permanent. One-time funding from the province and feds will not solve what the mayor has very accurately called a systemic structural deficit in our budget. We can try to plug holes here and there, but we need permanent ongoing funding, or the problem, the systemic and structural deficit in our budget is only going to continue to grow. I will leave it. Oh, sorry. And then the last thing I wanted to ask about was at Transit Commission, Madame Amilcar, je vous demandé une question concernant le.
I'd like to ask you a question regarding a lens, the equity lens.
When we're making decisions about how to use the various different levers at our disposal to solve that structural deficit. And I want to make sure that when staff come back to us with a budget, and certainly as they come back to us in the working group, and as they come back to council with a final proposal to structure that whole, that that equity lens is being applied. Personally speaking, I am dead set against service cuts. We cannot cut transit service further in this city. I am open to fare increases, and I absolutely understand that there is some elasticity in the system with regards to fare increases. We may not lose a ton of riders when we reduce fares, but we've already lost many of the riders who have a choice. The riders who are going to pay the higher fares are the riders who have no other choice. And I think that's important to keep in mind as we take a look at the various different levers. So I do hope that staff will be very explicit with us about what their research demonstrates the impact of using these various different levers will have on the various different residents of Ottawa. Mayor, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. Councillor Brockington.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm tempted to have a discussion or debate with my colleague about the most important factor with transit. For me, it's always been the reliability of the service. Fares are absolutely important, but if we don't have a budget and if the Transit Commission doesn't continue to push with the city manager's assistance to make bus reliability top priority, that is what will prohibit or not attract people to the system. We've got to make the system reliable. Two quick points and then a question. So every budget process, I ask general managers, do you have sufficient funds to deliver services to meet the needs of Ottawa residents? And the answer is always yes. And then I meet with directors and senior managers during the year, and they say, we're drowning. We don't have enough funds. And that's the frustration I have, because I happily disclose in great detail the main needs of my residents, and I need to see progress in the budget. So the budget doesn't reflect the main issues that I've raised over years, then it's a budget that doesn't meet the needs of my residents. I hear it all the time from residents that basic services that are being provided do not meet their satisfaction. It takes too long to get things done, or we just don't have the funds to do it. So either we are meeting the needs, the basic needs, not the wants, not the wish list items. The basic needs of our residents need to be met. And that's where the 2.9 is so important to me, is are we meeting the basic needs of our residents, yes or no? I just wanted to say, as chair of the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee, before I met with the city manager, city treasurer, and the mayor, I did reach out to the acting GM, also in his capacity as chief of paramedic services, the chief of fire services, the chief of bylaw, and the director of emergency preparedness to talk about their priorities. I wanted to understand the process they go through to identify their priorities, and satisfied with what I heard from all four of them. And I am comforted that a net increase in bylaw officers, to your question, Councillor Leeper, is being pursued. I can't predict what the final number will be, but staff have heard this request from multiple members of council, and I hope the draft budget will reflect this. The question I have is regarding some outstanding legal matters that the city faces. There could be action that will be required in 2025 that will see the city have to respond to litigation that's been brought against the city. How does that get reflected in the 2025 budget? How do we, if we're expected to answer legal outcomes, how do we finance those matters?
Mr. Mayor, as you can appreciate, the challenge is what is that value? So until we have a very clear, predictable, comforting number, what that is, we can't budget for that. But what we do have, not to discount that, is we do have our reserves. So reserves are for the one-time unforeseen items, such as settlements. So that's one of the backstop risk mitigations that we use for that particular scenario.
And are there settlements that are covered by insurance that the city holds, or are we not covered by those types of matters?
Mr. Mayor, it will be case specific, whether or not insurance is engaged or not. I can advise that we'll be bringing forward the comprehensive legal services report in October, and that will give some focus on some of the litigation matters that have occurred in the first half of 2024, and then looking forward to 2025.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. I just had a couple of quick questions before we vote. So the $153 million in savings, as you described it, the equivalent of a 7.5% tax increase that we've avoided because of those savings, and that were identified in part through the service review, of which I'm a member along with Councillors Carr and Curry. Given that the overall city budget has increased during the time that those savings were achieved, would it then be accurate to say that those savings have been reinvested in programs and services for our residents?
Mr. Mayor, yes, that would be correct.
And regarding the questions that have been asked about the range of options that we have to close the transit budget gap, and I respect the fact that people are seeing big numbers in those ranges. Your intention is to continue to work with the working group, which consists of Councillor Leeper, Councillor Gower, Councillor Tierney, and I, to find the right balance between those options after we learn what funds are available from other sources of like the federal and provincial governments. Is that right?
Mr. Mayor, that is correct, and that's explicitly stated in 2B of the recommendations.
And then after consulting with the working group and bringing a recommendation, it will be the decision of City Council what levers to apply and how much in the budget process.
Mr. Mayor, that is correct.
A couple of people mentioned the report from the Financial Accountability Office that came out over the last few days. The information that was included in that report that suggests that Ottawa is receiving far less per capita in funding for transit projects and for transit in general. Is that consistent with what you've seen as you've been working on our finances over the last few years?
Mr. Mayor, that is accurate. It kind of really leads right into the analysis that we're doing on our side.
And part of what was revealed in that report is that transit fares in Ottawa contribute less than in other cities to the overall budget for transit. I believe that transit fares make up the smallest percentage of in Ottawa of any transit budget in any major city. So would it be accurate to say that taxpayers are contributing more in Ottawa as a percentage to public transit than in other cities in Ontario?
Mr. Mayor, correct.
Okay. Which is not necessarily a reason for us to dramatically increase transit fares, but just to know where we're starting from as we go through this process. And finally, you alluded to this earlier, but the city has, over the last few months, put in place a hiring pause and a discretionary spending freeze. Is that correct?
Mr. Mayor, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. Those were my questions. So we'll ask for a vote on the budget direction, please, a recorded vote.
Councillor Lulaf. Councillor
Yes.
Dudas. Councillor Dudas.
Yes.
Councillor Curry.
Yes.
Councillor Gower.
Yes.
Councillor Tierney.
Yes.
Councillor King.
No.
Councillor Leeper.
No.
Councillor Brockington.
Yes, but abstain on or dissent on 2 Bravo.
Councillor Menard.
No.
Councillor Giroux.
Yes, I'll dissent on 2G.
Councillor Vice Chair Kitts.
Yes.
Mayor Sutcliffe.
Yes.
9 yeas, 3 nays.
Okay, thank you. On item 5.2, the 2024 tax and rate operating and capital budget Q2 status, is that carried?
Carried.
Item 5.3, draft statement of investment policies and procedures for prudent investor standard. Well, we can just, if you have questions, we can ask now. Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks very much. I know we were doing the agenda a little different today, and I just had a couple of questions to staff on the prudent investor status. I just wanted to ask some questions about how we're changing who manages the funds that would be invested. And just correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, the new investment board being created outside of what staff normally manage would manage the 1.5 billion in long-term investments that we have, and then the $200 million endowment, I believe, from a hydro sale previously. And
yes, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. Yes.
And then staff would continue to manage the cash position, the 877 million in cash investment side, and the $358 million sinking fund.
Correct.
And in the move over to the investment board, we're hiring, I guess, investment officers to help with this. There's a cost of $230,000 identified. That would be absorbed by the presumed increase in I guess, returns that would come with the move.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
And we're assuming long-term returns as part of the statement at 5.5%. That was our goal on the basic returns. I guess, is it above and beyond CPI, or is that's including our CPI inflation?
Mr. Mayor, that is above CPI. Yes.
Okay. How have we done to date on investment returns? Has it been that 5.5% and above, or has it been a different type of performance in the last while?
I'll ask Isabel to come up and get the more details on that one.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So actually, to answer the last question, it does include CPI, so it's total returns.
Okay.
And then we've averaged about 3%.
Okay. We've averaged 3%, including inflationary increases. That's been the total amount. And I know other municipalities in Ontario, I think Toronto, and it was Barrie, I think are moving to the prudent investor standard, where there's a board kind of external that manages these pieces. And we've supported this previously, and I support the moves that the city is making on it. The questions I have are around the investment long term. So assuming a 5% return or 5.5% return is in the document, are there other areas that the city could invest, say the endowment fund or some portions of those, that would give us long-term returns for city projects? So I guess, things like building retrofits, other areas where we might see a return on investment come back to us that we've seen in the past. Are there areas like that where it would make more sense to invest some of those funds into a return on investment plan rather than just the, I guess, the longer term investment on the market?
So that would not be part of the prudent investor portfolio. A prudent investor follows a certain standard in terms of the risk portfolio and managing that risk portfolio, balancing the risk in that portfolio. Investments in other projects would be a budget process.
And I guess, is it even possible to say, look, of the 1.5 billion or 1.7 billion the investment board would be managing, that there's a portion of that that might be better invested internally within the city? Is it possible to say that that would then go to that particular project where we know we're going to get, say, higher returns internally because of our previous history, for example, on things like the lighting standards where we used Hydro Ottawa to we got a substantial amount of savings year after year, which I see we're booking in the part of the efficiency savings that the mayor has referenced. Is there something like that? Is that possible, I guess, to have some of those funds go to a project that would return us higher rates than, say, a 5.5%?
Mr. Mayor, yes. I mean, we do have, just to kind of reset a little bit, like from our endowment fund, we do invest $13 million a year into our capital portfolio as well. And even from an investment income perspective, as we see this kind of generate more investment income, there could be an opportunity where we flow more to capital if needed. If that's a case by case that we can present through the budget process.
And are those the returns that we're seeing from that fund, for example, that are being reinvested in that capital project? Or where's that 13 million coming from? I assume it's from returns from investment.
Correct. That's part of the returns from our endowment.
Okay. The other question I just have is we've previously given direction as a committee and council on the prudent investor standard, and incorporating things like review of what kind of investments we're making as a city, trying to align with council priorities, of course. So is that being considered as part of the document that's been put together? Have those directions been incorporated into the documentation that's before us today?
Mr. Mayor, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Can you maybe follow up with me offline, because I don't need to ask these other questions here, just on that one piece around those directions and what we're doing? I know City Manager Stephenson and I have had lots of discussions about this in the past too, so helpful to just have some more discussion about that investment board. And it's a big amount of money that we're investing here, and it's a big change for the city. So I want to make sure we're doing it with the full direction that's been given in the past. So maybe we could just follow up and have a quick discussion. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Is the item carried? 5.4, presentation on information technology services update for Q3. So we do have a presentation on that. Go ahead whenever you're ready. Let's wait for the presentation to come up. So, Mr. Mayor, as the presentation is coming up, so this is, again, the commitment that we made last year in terms of, there used to be the ITS subcommittee. That's no longer. So we've been coming back on a quarterly basis in terms of providing an update on what the work that's being done in the information technology department. So joining me today is Jason Barney. He's the associate CIO. So he's part of one of our development programs that we run at the city in terms of we label it as the AD program. So Jason's been an associate CIO for the past 11 months or so. So he's here with me today to walk you through a presentation in terms of highlighting some of the key things that the IT departments are working on and focusing some of the concerns or case maybe. So over to you, Jason.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. As Cyril mentioned, I'm Jason Barney, the Associate CIO, and I'm pleased to be here to present an update on some of the work underway for information technology services this year. Bonjour au président et aux membres du comité.
Hello to the chair and committee members. I'm happy to be here to present an update of some of the work underway for information technology this year.
With the city's many different lines of business to provide innovative and cost-effective technology solutions to support the delivery of municipal services to Ottawa residents. We provide digital leadership for the city by proactively supporting departments to achieve their business priorities through innovative technology while considering all legal, cybersecurity, statutory, and record-keeping obligations. Today, I'll be highlighting a few key components of our work. I'll give some context on our ITS strategic priorities and some of the related work going on around those. I'll provide an update on the progress we've made in deploying our data classification and handling policy. And finally, I'll talk a little bit more about the city's use of artificial intelligence and the work we've been doing to prepare our people for this complex and diverse technology. Next slide, please. Our strategic priorities have remained consistent over the past several years while continuing to align to the city's emerging needs. Overall, it is ITS's goal to achieve digital excellence within our organization by providing a consistent, secure, modern, and innovative technology environment. Nous visons à atteindre l'excellence numérique au sein de notre organisation en
We
fournissant
wish to achieve digital excellence by offering a technology environment that's coherent, modern, innovative, and secure.
The three pillars of secure city, digital modernization, enterprise technology, and data. Secure City focuses on strengthening the city's technology posture. We're committed to making sure that technology used to deliver services to our residents is secure and reliable. The findings from the 2023 cybersecurity audit have driven several of our key projects under this pillar, including everything from firewall upgrades to strategies around data backups to the cloud. The digital modernization focus area is all about making sure that our city infrastructure and applications are up to date and continue to meet the needs of our partners. We're committed to ensuring that our technical debt is reduced in the most cost-effective and practical manner, balancing the need for investment with the ability to leverage existing technical capabilities. For instance, we've migrated the management of building code permits, applications, and inspections from the legacy map system to our new land management solution. This launched last week and is just the second of many phases that we have planned. Enterprise technology and data is our final pillar. There have been a focus in recent years on using data to drive decisions, and for that to take place, we need to make sure we have the proper processes and governance structures in place. We've done a lot in the data space, including consulting with other municipalities, and we're actively sharing best practices. The work in this area is about examining what we have now and figuring out what we need in order to continue succeeding in the future. Next slide, please. Data classification and handling policy. In 2023, we introduced a new policy for staff called the Data Classification and Handling Policy. The goal of this policy is to establish a framework for classification, appropriate handling, and disposition of city data based on its level of sensitivity, value, and criticality to the city. This policy helps us implement additional controls to ensure we're protecting residents' information while meeting all of our legal, legislative, and regulatory obligations. I'm pleased to say that our security team has made great strides in implementing many of those measures, as you can see on this slide. We've implemented sensitivity labels in our emails, which some of you may have seen. These labels are a visual indicator of the sensitivity of information contained in the email. This label can be changed up a level or down a level to reflect the appropriate classification, and that change is tracked for auditing purposes. We've also rolled out new technical rules around data loss prevention to internal staff, such as locking down the ability to download most documents to non-city devices. Both of these initiatives have been met with great success, and we are planning additional measures in the future to continue this work around preserving the security of our data. Next slide, please. When you say artificial intelligence or AI, most people picture ChatGPT or sci-fi robots. In reality, AI is a vastly complex field and deals with everything from the most basic search functionality and autocorrect all the way to machine learning. Most new technology now has an artificial intelligence component already built in, meaning AI is integrated into many of the city's technology solutions in varying capacities, including GPS on our fleet vehicles, GIS analysis, or LED street lighting sensors. The city's IT services is devoted to ensuring that all technology used by staff, whether resident-facing or for internal use, is safe and secure, considers data privacy and security of information, and adheres to all applicable legislation. Les services de technologie de l'information de la ville
Information technology services for the city ensures that all technology used by staff, whether resident-facing or for internal use, is secure and takes into account data confidentiality and information security in compliance with all applicable legislation.
Threat and risk assessments, architectural reviews, and privacy impact assessments are standard for all technology requests. As you've likely gathered, the city does make use of AI in many ways. We have hundreds of examples of automation and data analytics. These have become part of our day-to-day and have reduced operational burdens on employees. We use AI-powered solutions to scan and analyze application code to identify potential security vulnerabilities, quality issues, and ensure adherence to best practices. We use AI tools for content management to extract key data points and improve workflow efficiency, decision-making, and productivity. For instance, we leverage AI in content management to extract metadata from our camera-related tickets, enabling staff to sort through the documents more effectively. We've already implemented a virtual agent as part of the new 311 system. It leverages AI to enhance agent support through real-time assistance during calls and delivers real-time suggestions, relevant knowledge-based articles, and customer history drawn from the system, as well as recommendations on the type of service requests that need to be submitted. Only city staff are interacting with the virtual agent. In addition, ITS is working with multiple city departments to do research and development in various AI fields such as image recognition and data extraction, automated classification of assets, AI-enhanced chatbots, and data analysis. Right now, we are working, for instance, on image recognition machine learning routines to extract information from street signs and street crack detection. Testing of new use cases is required to ensure that AI is used effectively and securely. While AI is integrated into many different technologies at the city, the use of more complex AI fields, such as machine learning and AI-enhanced chatbots, is currently limited to non-sensitive data types and internal uses only to ensure the security of city information. Once we understand the full start-to-finish information flow and required governance, the use of more sensitive data types can be considered. ITS is continuously testing new AI capabilities, enabling staff to skill up and understand AI, its risks, possible mitigations, support requirements, and potential use cases where AI can provide optimal return on investment. ITS is also monitoring AI tools released by other organizations, both public and private, municipalities, and the private sector to leverage any applicable lessons learned in consideration for use in our operations. Before an AI product or tool is employed for wider use or launched on a public-facing platform, it will need to undergo extensive testing to avoid potential risks that could negatively impact user experience. Next slide, please. While traditional AI is about performing tasks and making decisions based on existing data, generative AI is about creating new and original content. This tool has become a large part of society. We see students using it in schools, staff leveraging it at work to create realistic and diverse content such as text, images, audio, and video. In response to this shift, we've done two things. First, we developed a guide around the responsible use of generative AI. This guide was developed in consultation with over 60 stakeholders across the City of Ottawa, as well as with Microsoft and the Government of Canada. The focus of this guide is to educate staff on what generative AI is, the risks, the benefits, the importance of human oversight and decision-making, and reminding staff of the policies already in place, highlighting their personal responsibility as employees of the City of Ottawa. In short, we want to make sure our employees are making informed decisions when they leverage these tools. En bref, nous voulons que nos employés prennent des décisions éclairées.
We want our employees to make informed decisions when using AI tools.
And to carefully review the responses from Gen AI. We want them disclosing when generative AI gets used and challenging what it produces. This guide provides the resources staff can use to make those types of informed decisions. The second thing we've done is approved the enterprise version of Microsoft Copilot for the web as a city's standard Gen AI tool. The enterprise edition of this technology doesn't track interactions or the data that gets input. It also cites its sources, allowing the user to understand where the information came from that was used to create the responses, which is a deficiency we've noted with other tools. There are a number of use cases where we feel generative AI can enhance our work, including drafting emails and internal documents, getting feedback on written work, summarizing information, and exploring new concepts. Everything that comes out of this tool needs to be reviewed by a person to ensure that the results are accurate and valid. I'm sure everyone here has seen examples of where generative AI has made mistakes or incorrect assumptions. I've personally had many times where I've pointed out an error in a response, and it's pretty satisfying to have it respond with, "Sorry, you're right, I made a mistake." We'll be continuing to provide training resources and learning series to ensure employees understand their responsibilities when it comes to AI tools, specifically Gen AI, given its popularity. And for the record, these notes were not generated through Copilot, they were written by a human. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, technology changes at such a rapid pace, and IT will continue to assess advancements that could be potentially leveraged by the organization. The important point for us to ensure is we're making the right investments to better the lives of our residents. Thank you all for allowing me to take this opportunity to present this update on some of the incredible work that our people are doing in the technology world. Je vous remercie de me donner l'occasion de présenter cette mise à jour sur
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to present this update on the incredible work that our staff are doing in technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Councillor Curry.
Thank you very much, Jason. I'm absolutely thrilled to hear from you. We've been waiting for this for quite a while. And honestly, thanks, Councillor Dudas, for putting in that inquiry. Very helpful information. A couple of things. I was at a presentation in the Tech Park last week on AI and cybersecurity, and to say that it was frightening would be really an understatement. And it was more about AI being used against us and how prepared are we. So, I mean, I'm so glad we're using AI in every way that we can. I love the enterprise one. I'm glad we have a guide. That's all great. I guess, you know, along with the sort of scary presentation, there was the question about governance for your cybersecurity as an organization. And we used to have a separate committee, and I'm not, you know, I don't love committee city. I'm not asking for more committees, but the question was, do we think we have the right governance for cybersecurity right now, given that it's reporting to this committee? And I asked the clerk earlier this week whether we're going to look at the midterm governance, and it isn't on the agenda, but I'm wondering what your opinion is.
Mr. Mayor, I'll take it because, as you recall, we do have a new CISO that started a few months ago, so that reports into my department. So I think we do. That's one of the things that we're working closely. Part of Victor's first, 39, 120-day plan is to kind of create that governance. And we're coming back. I can't remember if we're coming in October, November to FinCorp, and we're going to do a briefing update on cybersecurity at that time. And we'll have more information in terms of what that governance structure looks like at the city.
Okay, I'll look forward to that. And then just my other question on that, given that the presentation I watched was all about how AI can be used against us, and it was about fake, chatbots. It was about, people pretending to be somebody else and actually calling a meeting and holding a meeting as someone else, and people being oblivious. Do you think we're going to get more information on how we're prepared for that?
I'll start off and you can top me up, Mr. Mayor. Well, I think that's where we had that responsible use user guide kind of created. Jason spoke to a couple of things where we're limiting the use of the generative AI tools. So it's evolving, right? It's one of those things where we're also working closely with our federal partners to see, okay, what can we leverage from some of the things they're doing there. But we're certainly keeping a pulse on our policy to make sure that we are informing our staff of the responsible use of AI and generative AI, specifically generative AI. You want to?
The only thing I would add, mention a few things. With every technology, there's obviously an opportunity to do things for good or negative things. We use it internally as well for those types of protections that we're using against the threats that we see to the city. So we definitely leverage AI through our security operations to counteract some of those negative uses of AI that are out there.
Okay, good to know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Dudas.
Councillor Johnson was ahead of me. Oh, it's okay. All right. Oh, okay, perfect. Just I wanted to thank you for this, and I wanted to thank you for the response to the inquiry. It was actually something that came to mind when I was at an FCM conference with several of my colleagues, where I think it was Kelowna, BC, was talking about how they were integrating AI into their processes and just the pitfalls that they were identifying and the opportunities as well. And I know I had an opportunity to speak to some of my colleagues. I think Councillor King, we chatted about, we were wondering how our city was kind of engaging in this kind of dance with generative AI and various AI processes. So this was very informative. And my question to you is, we just had a conversation about the budget and the difficulties we'll be facing, the hard conversations we'll be facing. Do you foresee, and I'm not speaking about human resources, I'm talking about processes and the services we provide. Do you foresee that this type of technology, whether it's this year or in coming budget years, will be able to integrate it in a fashion that will see cost savings or improved customer service provisions?
Mr. Mayor, yes, because that's one of the things that I brought forward. I think it was in a 23 or 24 budget. I can't recall. We've used it in several cases, specifically in the business process area of the organization. And I'll speak to specifically in Joseph's shop and revenue. As you can appreciate, the volume that goes through that shop in terms of the tax bill, the water bills and all that. We've leveraged automation to kind of streamline some of those data collection points, which is really help, remove the capacity drain. So leveraging those improvements to technologize the process to remove that capacity drain on our staff so that they can get more into the QA type of the work that comes with that.
And in terms of, that sounds wonderful. And in terms of residents, you mentioned about the 311 and the chat opportunities there. Do you foresee that we'll be engaging in more elements such as that, where residents will have better interactions with our city through those processes?
We are currently piloting that right now. One of the things that we want to make sure is that if we do deploy a public-facing bot, that it is going to provide a good service, one that's not going to negatively impact what service we provide today. It has the opportunity to serve some of those more simple responses that would allow our staff to then focus on some of the more complex tasks that you would typically get through speaking with an agent. But certainly there are opportunities for us, and we're actively reviewing other municipalities that are deploying these types of bots. We've seen some not perfect rollouts of some of these things where the experience has not been great. So we want to make sure that when we do this type of thing public, that the experience is what we're expecting.
Thank you. I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation in the coming months, weeks, years, about how we can and cannot integrate this into our processes in a way that's comfortable for us as a municipality. So thank you very much for the information and the presentation.
Thank you, Councillor Dudas. Councillor Tierney.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll keep it brief. First of all, thank you. Love to see advancements. We've come a long way since back in even 2010, where we've changed a lot of how we do things. We're not using physical servers, we're using virtual servers, we're using cloud computing. A lot of things have changed for the very good. We also decided to very heavily rely on COTS products, commercial off the shelf, instead of custom code, which is the way to go. So we can generate the raw data feeds usable by neighborhoods and communities with lots of smart people. I know we're looking at, what 311s are bread and butter. They do a terrific job. I hear nothing but good things about 311. But at the same time, I guess we're looking at new processes and software. I guess two questions. First, will the new 311 tools be something that's, strength tested, a COTS product if we're moving to the new platform? And second, it will workflow, and I know there's a whole series of union issues around that. We've never really activated workflow when it comes to either Dynamics or SharePoint or any of the other products we have for those reasons, which allows, after X number of days to keep it moving along. Just wondering how in depth you know about 311 and the ability to make sure that those records still continually get focused on when they're in our system.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I think as Jason referenced, as we do test these new technologies, the key is to the key point, underlying key point is, test, and then train, so that we make sure that we minimize. I mean, unfortunately, we don't live in a world where we can remove all risks, but we want to make sure that the right service is there for the public and the public experience is there, fundamental. So, Jason can speak to the fact that we rolled out Dynamics earlier this year, and it was kind of like all hands on deck from an IT perspective, all hands on deck from a service auto perspective on the rollout. I myself actually was there the morning of, the day of, and it was impressive to see the attention that both teams came together in terms of ensuring that, when you flick that switch, that, okay, let's be ready here for what happens when the switch flicks. So hopefully that answers your question, or Jason, you can.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the biggest point is that no one probably noticed that we switched systems, which is a good thing. Behind the scenes, obviously, we brought a lot of new capabilities, like I mentioned, with the virtual agent. The other challenging issue that we have, the city is a large place, is ensuring that we have seamless integrations to our back-end systems that are doing those fulfillments. So if it's a work order in SAP or in Maximo or any other enterprise system, is ensuring that that workflow is consistent through those integrations so that it is seamless and that it is returning back so people are informed on where things stand.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney. Councillor Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my questions focus on the strategic priorities, perhaps, of the digital modernization and enterprise technology and data. I'm wondering how this work integrates with the information that we got through a press release that we are now one of the Bloomberg Philanthropies City Data Alliance cities. I'd like to understand exactly what Bloomberg Philanthropies is doing when it comes to modernizing our data or advising us on how to modernize our data.
Mr. Mayor, I'll speak to the one dimension, and I'm not sure if Wendy might want to add some of the other dimensions, but one of the things that we're doing is we're taking an enterprise-wide view of our IT ecosystem. Very much like, kind of like the facilities rationalization, we're doing the same thing on the IT side of the equation. As you can appreciate, we have hundreds of systems of various magnitude out there. We're trying to leverage the core ERP, so that's your major big systems like SAP, where we can slowly kind of reduce that technology stack. And by doing that, as Jason talked about, in terms of making sure the back-end systems are integrated and the feed is there, it reduces the complexity, it reduces the risk, and it kind of streamlines it a little bit. So we're doing that work in side by side or in parallel with some of the data governance work that the Bloomberg Initiative is doing.
Yeah, thanks. I'll just add to what Cyril's saying. So I think we spoke about this previously. The mayor, myself, and his chief of staff had the opportunity to be part of the Bloomberg City Leadership Initiative. And they've got various opportunities for cities to participate, and data is one of those. The city submitted an application and was chosen as one of many cities that are actually participating in this. And so we've kicked this initiative off here with Bloomberg. They're here to look at how we're leveraging data and help us in terms of advancing that. And we have the benefit of working with other cities across the world who are also doing the same thing. I think one of the great things that we heard from Bloomberg when we kicked it off was their view of where we are today is we're actually more advanced than many cities across the world. So they were really impressed in terms of what they've seen with what we're doing, but they're going to help us take it even further. And that's a piece that we're working on over the 6 to 9 months.
Thank you. Certainly, I can appreciate the idea of reducing your technology stack to fewer servers, fewer systems. I can appreciate all that. I just wonder when it comes to, the broader implication for the City Data Alliance is does it impact multiple department work plans to participate in a program like this? Are they being asked to do something that perhaps council has not seen in terms of their work plan, or does it sort of dovetail with existing priorities?
Yeah. It actually complements the work plans to date because data governance, leveraging data is important to everyone. I think it's important to council in terms of us reporting back and leveraging the data that we do have. And you're going to see some of that reporting come through our term of council priorities with respect to the update that's coming.
Okay, so you're suggesting that there has been no disruption of existing work plans for them to participate in a Bloomberg program. The reason I ask is just because with many of us who have maybe worked with consultants before, sometimes your consultants come in and give you a new language or a new parameter within which to work, and you may have to unlearn or relearn a new system in order to participate. I'm just trying to confirm that we haven't seen any interruptions like that.
No, there's been no interruptions, and I would suggest that it's really been really a quite nice integration in terms of the work that we are doing.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Is that report received? Okay, item 6.1, the status update on Finance and Corporate Services Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending September 5th. Is that received? Item 7.1 is the application for approval to expropriate lands in the Baseline Transit Priority Phase project. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Mayor. I did read the staff report. Appreciate the item before us. I do have a question for staff. When the provincial government announced the new funding partnership with the city, one of the many projects that they want to fund is the March Road Rapid Bus Corridor. And at that time, I had asked questions to staff to clarify the prioritization of bus corridors in the city of Ottawa. I had mentioned that on more than one occasion, the former general manager Manconi had confirmed publicly that the Baseline Road transit priority was #1 in the city, although that was not in the context of debating all of them, which I think we'll do next year when we finalize the TMP. And more recently, Ms. Chi had indicated that there was no such prioritization. So I'm a little curious to see this item on the agenda today. I'm certainly not opposed to the plans for this intersection, Green Bank at Baseline. I've sat through a number of presentations by staff, even hosted a multi-ward information session on the corridor. But I'm just seeking clarification if the Baseline Transit Priority Project is not a priority per Ms. Chi, then why is this matter before us now?
I did not say that Baseline BRT was not a priority. It's a very important project. It spans many communities, and we completed the environmental assessment for it. We committed funding to that, as well as designs have funding has been spent on it. So it's important. What I had mentioned is that the priorities will be reviewed as part of the TMP update, and so you will see that through that exercise.
When did the city of Ottawa make the Baseline Transit corridor a priority?
That would have been as part of the current 2013 TMP, and that's why we were rolling out all the planning and the design in accordance with that TMP.
So what are the dates of completion for this project?
Is there dates for completion of construction?
Yeah, it's a project that was identified 11 years ago, so we must be close.
It was a BRT project which needs funding from the provincial and federal governments. We don't fund these major transit corridors with just municipal funding, so that's what we have to wait on for that. In terms of the project is actually broken into segments. It spans all the way from Bayshore Station to Billings Bridge Station. There's a section, it was studied to be BRTs, but we're going to implement it in phases with BRT starting from Woodruff to the east, and anything to the west of that would be transit priority measures. So this intersection, as part of this report, is part of the transit priority measures that will get underway as soon as council approves staff to go ahead with this expropriation. So in terms of the timing of the overall project, that's going to be done in phases and as funding is approved.
Thank you for that. So today you have reconfirmed this is now a priority for the city of Ottawa, but there's no funding to complete the project. We are assuming upper levels of government will pay for this corridor. There are no times associated with what you've said is now a priority for the city.
There will be projects implemented in increments, starting with transit priority measures, and with all of our major, whether it's BRT or LRT, it requires senior levels of government, and the priorities across the city of all these various projects will be reviewed again and confirmed or adjusted in accordance with affordability and with the whole project again, the whole city as part of the Transportation Master Plan update, which will come to you next July or thereabouts.
So it's possible that this project, which you've reconfirmed today, is a priority again, and it was previously identified in 2013 as a transportation priority, would be potentially unprioritized based on a hypothetical outcome next year when council confirms the TMP?
If we're putting dollars towards this project, it's highly unlikely that it will slip into the back of the list.
If the city of Ottawa was funding this project.
For transit priority, we do have dollars planned in our long-range financial plan for this, yes.
Okay, I appreciate the information today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Johnson. Sorry. Vice Chair Kitts. Go ahead. Okay, Councillor Johnson, go ahead then. Sorry.
I'll make it quick.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you very much. I just wanted to confirm for residents of College Ward sort of the limits of the scope of this expropriation. I know we won't go into details exactly, but can we confirm that it is around the Baseline Green Bank intersection and not implying, you know, a larger scope of expropriation down Baseline?
Mr. Mayor, that is correct. So we're looking at 5 properties in and around the Baseline Green Bank intersection for minor modifications.
Thank you. And do we have a plan when it comes to this expropriation and this rehabilitation to replace the trees that are potentially lost along this intersection? There aren't many, but it would be nice to know.
And Mr. Mayor, yes, that is certainly part of the rehabilitation plan, and staff working in the design area will be engaging with those property owners and ensuring that we meet those expectations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Vice Chair Kitts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think when this was previously discussed, Councillor Brockington, you and I were sparring a little bit because there's the BRT in my neck of the woods that I also find a priority. But seeing this item on the agenda got my back up as well, and I had a chance to speak to your staff beforehand, Vivi, to get clarity. But just to be clear, what's in front of us today is not presuming the outcome of the TMP, but much like the transit priority measures on the Blackburn bypass in the east, the funding for this step was identified through the EA, correct?
Yes, that's correct, Councillor.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is the item carried? There are no in-camera items. I will note the information previously distributed. There are no notice of motion that I'm aware of for future meeting. Are there any inquiries? Any other business? Okay, motion to adjourn. Carried. Thank you. Merci.